Committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on oversight of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin the hearing with opening statement. Chair recognizes himself. Government's not supposed to change the rules without a vote of Congress. Executive branch executes the laws, the legislative branch passes the laws. But when you bypass that format, which is exactly what the ATF has done, you get all kinds of bad things. First, it was the pistol brace rule. November 26, 2012, the ATF told the inventor of the pistol brace, quote, he would not be subject to the National Firearms Act. But last year, they changed the rule. After 12 years, changed the rule. The rule, by the way, the pistol brace was put together to help disabled veterans be able to shoot, be able to practice and shoot at the range. Now, with the rule change, if you don't turn it in, get rid of it, you become a felon. Then it was a policy change that the ATF enacted. The ATF now says if a federal firearms licensee makes a mistake on the form, even if it's a clerical mistake, well, that now equals a, quote, willful falsifying of records, and they could lose their license. In fact, 157 FFLs lost their license last year in this gotcha game that the ATF is playing with people who are in the business of selling firearms. And the pressure to deal with what the ATF comes out and finds you made some mistake on a form, many people are just voluntarily giving up their FFL. 24 in 2021, 69 in 2022, 80 people last year gave up their license versus dealing with the hassle from the agency that's supposed to help them comply, not put them out of business. And finally, there's the new definition of who actually needs a federal firearms license. Since 1968, the definition said it had to be your principal livelihood in the business of selling firearms. You needed that. If you were doing that, you needed an FFL. But this past Monday, new definition was put in place. It said if you're earning a profit, ATF can't really define what that means. You sell one gun to your cousin, made $10, made $50 on the sale of a gun, 2 guns to someone, 10 guns. In fact, they couldn't even tell the court how it works, this new definition. When you make up the rules as you go, bad things happen. You lose your livelihood for a clerical error. You become a felon for having a pistol brace they told you was legal for 12 years. And you might even get shot. That's what happened to Brian Malinowski just 2 months ago. We have Brian's widow with us today. She was here with us yesterday. Heard some powerful testimony from U.S. Attorney Bud Cummings, who represents the Malinowski family. In fact, I'm going to read from Mr. Cummings' testimony that he gave in this room yesterday. It's legal to buy, trade, and sell guns without a federal firearms license if you are a collector or hobbyist. But at some point, the ATF decided that Brian Malinowski had crossed a murky line, and he was no longer a hobbyist. Because of that, ATF concluded he was required to purchase a $200 federal firearms license before he sold any more guns. I call it murky because there is no bright line test. It's truly subjective. But one thing seems certain. Brian Malinowski received no warning. His family, his friends, his work colleagues would all guarantee you he loved his career and he would have never knowingly jeopardized it over a weekend hobby. His real job, his main job, only job, was he ran the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, highest paid official in the municipal government, made $260,000 a year. But on March 19th at 6:01 a.m., over 1 hour before sunup, 10 carloads of ATF agents and Little Rock Police Department officers came to the Malinowski home to execute their search warrant. Not an arrest warrant, search warrant. At 6:02:46 a.m., ATF agents in full SWAT gear approached the front door. They had a piece of tape ready to cover the camera lens of the doorbell camera, which they did. Next, Mrs. Malinowski heard only a loud crash as her front door caved in. Her husband, Brian, woke up to the sound of the crash, found a pistol, loaded a magazine, and left the bedroom to investigate. Brian warned his wife to stay behind in the bedroom, but Mayor stubbornly followed him down the hallway. The ATF apparently killed electricity to the home. The front room was usually well lit at night, but Mrs. Malinowski saw only darkness as she peered down towards the front entryway. She could only see shadowy outlines of presumed home invaders standing in her front hallway. That's what Brian saw too. Brian fired a few shots at the intruders' feet to drive them back out of the front door. The ATF shot Brian in the head. His wife was standing inches away from him. A mere 57 seconds. 57 seconds elapsed from the time agents covered the doorbell camera until gunshots erupted and Brian was fatally wounded. 6:02:46 to 6:03:43. Agents immediately dragged Mrs. Malinowski into the front yard. She was barefoot, wearing minimal night clothing, and the temperature was 34 degrees. They locked her in the back seat of a car and detained her there for 4 hours, refusing her many requests to check on her husband she had just seen shot, wouldn't allow her to get close or even use the neighbor's bathroom. Even though policies have been in place at both the ATF and the Little Rock Police Department for the past 3 years, requiring the use of body-worn cameras when executing any search warrant, the Department of Justice tells us that no body cameras were used. If this isn't the weaponization of government, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. Mr. Dettelbach, we're going to have questions about this and a host of other things the ATF has done under your watch. A host of other things. We appreciate you being here today. We appreciate you taking our questions, but there's going to be tough questions from folks on our side. And we have a video I'd like to show, which, just so it's a minute and a half, but it first shows ATF agents assembling in the Walmart parking lot a week before March 19th, when they were going to execute this search warrant. Again, pre-dawn hours a week before, but decided not to because they realized Mr. Malinowski wasn't home. And then it shows what happened a week later as they approached the Malinowski home. So let's run the video. Chair now recognizes the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we last conducted an oversight hearing of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, just over 1 year ago. Since that time, a few things have changed and a great many things have stayed the same. Let's begin with what has changed. Last month, the Attorney General signed an ATF final rule clarifying who is, quote, engaged in the business, unquote, of selling firearms, and who must therefore obtain a license to sell firearms and conduct the necessary background checks. This rule implements a change in this definition made by Congress when we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first significant piece of gun violence prevention legislation in nearly 30 years. Prior to the passage of the BSCA, a person was, quote, engaged in the business, unquote, of selling firearms if they did so, quote, with the principal objective of livelihood and profit, close quote. But under the new law, a person is engaged in the business of selling firearms if they do so, quote, to predominantly earn a profit, unquote. In finalizing this new rule, ATF has adhered to its directive from Congress and has ensured that ATF regulations are consistent with the definitions we updated through this historic legislation that makes Americans safer. Importantly, the new definition and the new rule ensure that more gun sales, including those at gun shows or through the internet, include a background check, a life-saving tool that keeps guns out of dangerous hands. These changes are the only significant expansion of the federal background check system since it was established in the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act in 1993. The Department of Justice estimates that there are over 20,000 unlicensed sellers who are taking advantage of ambiguity in the law and who will now have to obtain a license and conduct background checks. Yesterday, in a related hearing, Republicans argued that this new rule is being used to target individuals who are merely selling a gun from their personal collection or who occasionally buy and sell guns as part of a hobby. This is false. The rule, quote, expressly recognizes that individuals who purchase firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection or a legitimate lobby are permitted by the Gun Control Act to occasionally buy and sell firearms for those purposes or occasionally resell to a licensee or to a family member for lawful purposes without the need to obtain a license, close quote. The final rule also states that, quote, nothing in this rule shall be construed as precluding a person from lawfully acquiring a firearm for self-protection or other lawful personal use, close quote. The law and the rule do not impose any new requirements on those who are merely selling a firearm to a neighbor, a friend, or family member, or those who collect and occasionally sell firearms as part of their hobby. Rather than targeting innocent lobbyist sellers, this rule will prevent illegal gun sellers from profiting off gun trafficking. This comes at a critical time, given that the ATF's National Firearms Commerce and Trafficking Assessment revealed that unlicensed gun sales were contributing more and more to the flow of firearms into the black market and, unsurprisingly, becoming a leading source of crime guns. The second new development since we last heard from ATF Director Dettelbach is that Republicans used their control of the House to enact significant cuts to several critical law enforcement agencies, including the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the ATF. We knew this was coming because Republicans have been forthright in their determination to defund, intimidate, and hamstring the agency so that it can no longer effectively do its job and protect Americans from violent crime. Republicans' own messaging documents actually celebrate the 7% cut to the ATF, the law enforcement agency responsible for protecting communities from gun violence, stopping gun trafficking, and ensuring lawful and responsible gun ownership. This brings me to what is still as true today as it was over a year ago when we last conducted an oversight hearing of the ATF. ATF is still the primary federal agency tasked with keeping guns out of the wrong hands, and it is still doing that important work even with the budget cuts forced through by House Republicans. ATF is still providing vital resources that help state and local law enforcement solve crimes and prevent gun violence. ATF is still the only agency in the country that is able to trace crime guns, helping law enforcement determine how a gun came to be owned and used in a violent crime. ATF is also still the only agency that provides local, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement with ballistic imaging analysis, a critical tool that can help solve crime and prevent further gun violence. It provides its assistance at no cost to its law enforcement partners. Despite the significant value that ATF provides to state and local law enforcement, Republicans have defunded the agency, and they repeatedly seek to unravel its regulations through litigation, Congressional Review Act resolutions, and frivolous investigations, even when ATF is merely following the law as directed by Congress. Some Republicans have even introduced a bill to abolish the ATF altogether. The majority says that it stands with law enforcement. So why does it seek to abolish the only law enforcement agency with its capability of tracing crime guns? The majority says that they support state and local police. So why do they attempt to starve the agency that provides state and local police officers with so many critical resources for solving crime, including homicides, gun trafficking, and organized crime? And why do they oppose common sense protections, like background checks and red flag laws, favored by state and local police agencies nationwide? The answer lies in another part of ATF's responsibilities, making sure that gun dealers follow the law by conducting background checks, refusing to sell to those who are not allowed to have firearms, and keeping records so that crime guns can be traced. The overwhelming majority of gun sellers have no problem following these laws. But when gun dealers willfully refuse to follow them, it is ATF's responsibility to revoke their license to sell. Republicans' priorities are clear. They would prefer to keep every gun store in the country open, even those that willfully violate the law, rather than to let ATF save lives simply by enforcing the law. And this brings me to the final thing that is still the same since our last oversight hearing. It is still the case that we're losing more than 100 Americans to gun violence every single day. Even without counting suicides, we have already lost more than 6,000 Americans to shootings so far this year. That includes 88 young children, 454 teens, and 30 law enforcement officers who were killed by gunfire just this year. Democrats have put forth a range of solutions to prevent gun violence, to support law enforcement, and to solve crimes. But since they took control of the House, our Republican colleagues have not advanced a single bill that would make Americans safer from gun violence. Instead, they have continued to push for unfettered access to assault weapons, concealable rifles, and ghost guns, and to abolish the very agency tasked with preventing gun crimes. As Republicans continue to seek freedom from gun regulations, we will continue to seek communities free from gun violence. Director Dettelbach, thank you for appearing here today to talk about the important work that the ATF does to keep Americans safe. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back $1.4 billion in 2022, $1.6 billion in 2023, $1.75 billion in 2024. Hardly a cut to their budget. Without objections, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witness. Mr. Dettelbach is the Director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives. He was sworn in on July 13th, 2022. We welcome our witness and thank him for appearing today. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true, correct, to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You can be seated. Please know your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony. Director Dettelbach, you may begin.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, members of the committee. When I testified last year, I said it was my great honor to lead the dedicated employees of ATF. This year, I'll repeat that statement and add that agents run toward gunfire to protect strangers, and our staff works day and night to support our mission. Their work in the last year has been nothing short of spectacular. As I stated last year, the level of violent crime in America is unacceptable. However, due to the hard work of these heroes and our partners, we have made significant progress in making communities safer. Last year, our nation saw one of the steepest single-year declines in violent crime in its history. Murders down nearly 13% across 175 cities. This doesn't happen by accident. It is a result of hard and very dangerous work. In 2022, federal weapons convictions hit a record high, according to recent reporting. In 2023, ATF's criminal enforcement efforts were up again. We indicted even more cases and increased convictions by 8.5%. And the cases that we do make an impact because we focus on removing the most violent offenders from our streets. This progress tells us the strategies are working. It is not the time to let up now. ATF's data-driven support helps law enforcement lock up the trigger pullers and stop the flow of illegal guns to them from trafficking. We must go after both the shooters and the criminal traffickers, both. That is the only way we will continue to drive down firearms crime. Firearms trafficking is not a victimless crime. Those who illegally arm violent people, gang members, drug dealers, they are responsible for the violence that follows. A recent ATF report shows that 60% of trafficked firearms go to convicted felons and prohibited people, and thousands of these trafficked guns are used in murders and shootings. Furthermore, the most common type of firearms trafficking now is dealing firearms for profit without a license. In Midland, Odessa, Texas, for example, in 2019, a man who couldn't pass a background check from a licensed dealer instead went and got a gun from an illegally unlicensed firearm dealer. The result, a deal in a parking lot, a mass shooting, 7 dead, 25 shot, 3 police officers, and a 17-month-old child. These types of crimes prompted Congress to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act 2 years ago. The law provided new tools to hold firearms traffickers accountable. Since then, the Department of Justice, led by ATF and prosecutors, has charged nearly 500 defendants under those new provisions. Motivated by cases like the murders in Midland, Odessa, Congress also included a specific provision expanding who must obtain a federal license to deal firearms, and therefore, crucially, who must conduct background checks before selling those guns. Last month, ATF used the authority Congress delegated to it to issue a final rule on being, quote, engaged in the business of firearms dealing. This rule helps to identify those who must be licensed under Congress's law and is designed to raise compliance with the statute Congress wrote. Even with our progress, the toll of gun violence remains crushing. More than 40,000 people died from gun violence last year. Another 36,000 suffered grievous wounds or wounds from gun violence. And those are not just numbers. We all know, we agree those are real people, their parents, their brothers, their sisters, and their children. In fact, the leading cause of death for American children is gun violence. Not cars, not cancer, guns. That is unacceptable. We're reminded too often, it was 2 years ago tomorrow, in fact, that a shooter opened fire at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, murdering 19 kids, 2 teachers, shooting 17 others. We know there's been so many other tragedies like this. And last but not certainly least, as we commemorated Police Week last week, we're reminded that all too often, the victims of firearms violence carry the badge. Last year, 49 brave officers were killed in the line of duty by gunfire. This year, that number is already at 22, including 4 officers in North Carolina went to the funeral gunned down while executing a warrant at the home of a firearms violator. We have to support law enforcement together, including giving law enforcement the resources we need to protect Americans. Again, now is not the time to let up. We know what works. The data are supporting it. It's time to double and triple down together on our efforts to save more lives. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the committee, I look forward to your questions.
We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Dettelbach, in February, Chairman Biggs and I sent you a letter concerning the pipe bombs that were discovered on January 6th. These were pipe bombs from over 3 years ago, and the investigation surrounding it. After months without a response, day before yesterday, your department finally gave us a non-response. To be clear, the response was wholly inadequate and borders on showing contempt for Congress. To quote from the letter, this investigation remains ongoing. Accordingly, pursuant to longstanding Department of Justice policy, ATF cannot provide details. It goes on. This is about the safety of Congress. These bombs were a couple blocks from here, yet you refuse to answer questions about them. If you don't have contempt for us, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to some of my questions here today. Are you willing to answer those questions today?
I'm willing to try within the rules, which longstanding rules. I've been in 5 administrations at the Department of Justice, Democrat and Republican, and longstanding policy of the Department of Justice in both types of administration on both sides has been we do not comment on pending investigations.
Right. That's a policy. It's not been through some kind of rulemaking. That's a policy, and you can say that to the media, but you can't say it to Congress. We created your department. How many ATF personnel were on the Capitol premises on January 6, 2021?
Again, I don't believe I can answer specific questions about the investigation. I know that that may not relate to the investigation. So I know that I wasn't here during that period. That predated my time on January 6th, the January 6th attacks. So I know there were some ATF agents who were called to help protect members of Congress. I don't know how many.
Well, that's not an acceptable answer. We've asked you this months ago, and you just send us a letter saying you can't answer that. Yet, according to a FOIA report obtained by Judicial Watch, there were 19 people here. So for you to say you don't know or you can't tell us is ludicrous. I mean, these are subject to FOIA reports.
Congress, I'm happy to also get back to you with information. If I don't remember all the numbers at the tip of my fingers, I'm sorry about that.
Are you willing to confirm that the pipe bombs planted at the Capitol Hill Club and the DNC on January 6th couldn't have gone off with a 60-minute kitchen timer if they were placed the day before?
Respectfully, Congressman, I do believe that this does go into the area of the investigation, which is ATF is supporting. FBI is leading that investigation, and I cannot comment on
We're 3 years into it. Who was the on-scene incident commander for the ATF on January 6th?
Again, if you're asking about the scene of the investigation at the headquarters, again,
You're not going to tell us who the incident commander was?
I don't know. I'm telling you, if that relates to the scene not here at the Capitol building where we were protecting congresspeople from attack, but to the other investigation scene, we can try to get back to you, but I will tell you, if it relates to a pending investigation, we won't be able to comment.
Does the ATF provide training to U.S. Capitol Police on explosive detection, detonation, disarming, or conduct, or simulation training exercises with U.S. Capitol Police?
We provide, the National Center for Explosives Training and Research in Huntsville, Alabama, provides training to numerous different law enforcement agencies. I would not be surprised if Capitol Police were one of them. I don't know about the training regimen. People are going down there all the time to get training.
Were the 2 pipe bombs on January 6th part of a training exercise?
I cannot comment on a pending investigation, but if...
Okay, well then I don't need to hear what...
In general, I would say to that, I think if law enforcement knows that something is part of some sort of a law enforcement exercise, they wouldn't be conducting that long of an investigation in general, but I don't...
In my last remaining seconds, I want to show you a video of something that you said on 60 Minutes.
And we depend on firearms dealers, many of whom are our first line of defense, who will pick up the phone and help us and try to interdict this. And for those who aren't doing that, I hope and expect that as Americans, we will all do that. But those who aren't, you know, if somebody comes into your store in a border state and plunks down $12,000 cash money for one of these things, so that there's no credit card trail, you know, I mean, my word, we hope that people will help us as Americans and continue to help us and not make that sale.
Are you aware that it's illegal for you to create a registry of gun owners in the United States?
I am.
And are you insinuating here that somebody can't buy a firearm with cash?
No.
So why should a dealer call you if somebody's going through a background check and tell you that somebody is using cash?
We run a program called Don't Lie for the Other Guy, along with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And there are indicia of straw purchasing matters where there are warning signs where people can contact us. And firearms dealers who are law-abiding business owners, and the majority are, I want to say that again here, they frequently contact us, especially on the southwest border, because cartels are using straw purchases to arm themselves with the kind of weaponry that results in death and destruction and the danger to Americans and law enforcement.
We're concerned because banks are keeping these records and giving them to the government without a legal process, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chairman, I recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If Republicans were to succeed in their effort to abolish the ATF, how would that affect public safety, particularly gun violence in this country?
Protecting Americans from violent crime, including firearms violence, was, is, and will always continue to be ATF's top priority. And we work in partnership with state and local law enforcement officials to do that. We investigate the most dangerous, worst of the worst, the people who are out there, trigger pullers, terrorizing our communities. And as I said in my opening statement, the results speak for themselves. Working with our state and local partners, we do a dangerous job, we do it well, and we catch a lot of very violent people. The tools we make available to local law enforcement, the crime gun intelligence, which enables them to identify who those people are better than ever before, so we can focus limited law enforcement resources on catching them, is working. It is driving down violent crime in our cities. That's why everywhere I go in the country, Congressman, everywhere I go, red state, blue state, city,
But how-
rural, they ask for more ATF resources.
But if the Republicans were to succeed in their effort to abolish the ATF, how would that affect public safety?
Well, all of that would go away.
Okay.
All of that would go away. Our state and local partners who are asking for more ATF, they would be robbed of any ATF. All the cases that we do, all the gangs we prosecute, the RICOs, the VICARs, the cartel cases, all the things we do would disappear.
Thank you. While some House Republicans have sought to abolish the ATF, others have sought to defund it or to reduce its effectiveness through dramatic budget cuts. In fact, House Republicans have actually bragged about cutting the ATF by 7% this year. I understand that ATF has done an admirable job despite these budget cuts. For example, the agency has been able to dramatically reduce processing times for certain firearm transfer applications under the National Firearms Act. But can you describe the impact these cuts have had on the agency and how slashing funding for ATF reduces your ability to protect Americans from gun violence?
Yes. ATF is an agency that is not a large agency with an outsized mission, protecting people from violent crime. And we have a very focused, effective strategy to do that. But sometimes less is more. In law enforcement, less is not more. You can't get public safety on the cheap. And the fact of the matter is that pursuant to the cuts passed by Congress, we have canceled already 2 classes of special agents this year. Those are each 24 agent classes. I fear there will be more cancellations moving forward. We have obviously cut people in all job categories, lab technicians who run DNA tests to try to catch mass killers like happened in Goshen, California. We are doing the best with what you give us. We will continue to work to do that, but there's no doubt that the cuts that have been imposed will have a direct impact on public safety and ATF's mission to fight violent crime, no doubt.
Thank you. Last week, we heard a great deal from Republicans about the need to support state and local law enforcement. Can you tell us how ATF works with and supports state and local law enforcement?
There is no better partner in federal law enforcement for state and local police, sheriffs, state police than ATF. We stand shoulder to shoulder with local law enforcement doing the most violent cases that they do. And everywhere I go, as I said, Congressman, every chief I talk to, every sheriff I talk to, it doesn't matter, urban, rural, north, south, Midwest, East Coast, they all say the same thing.
Thank you.
You guys are doing great. Please send more agents.
Can you explain what a ghost gun or personally manufactured firearm is and why such firearms pose a danger to the American public?
ATF's legal responsibility is to implement the laws that Congress passes. Congress passed the Gun Control Act. The Gun Control Act talks about the need for those who are engaged in the business of selling firearms to have a license. It also talks about anything that is, quote, readily convertible to being an operable firearm, falling under the definition of firearm. And so people who are producing kits that they send out so that people can, then they're engaged in the business of doing it. I'm not talking about an individual hobbyist making a firearm for himself at home. That's allowed. But people who are selling these kits for money and saying, oh, you know, this is not readily convertible to being a firearm because it's not put together, we have we evaluate those, and the rule that we promulgated on privately made firearms addresses that. Congressman, the number of privately made firearms, which are untraceable, unserialized firearms that are used in crimes in a 5-year period went up 1,000, I'm going to say 1,000%, 10 times, by a multiple of 10, year over year. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is felons and violent people, they know they're going to do something bad. They don't want the firearm to be traced to them. It's a cold weapon. It's untraceable, and it's very dangerous in the wrong hands.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a May 22nd letter from Assistant Attorney General Carlos Uriarte to me that explains the risk that unserialized firearms or ghost guns pose to the public, their proliferation among guns found at crime scenes, and the numerous efforts of the Department of Justice to reduce violence caused by ghost guns and other firearms and to promote public safety.
Objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a March 7th Washington Post article titled, House Republicans Want to Defund the Police, which outlines how Republican cuts to the FBI and ATF will harm the important work of state and local law enforcement.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Dettelbach, what were you trying to hide? On the raid on March 19th to Mr. Malinowski's house, disabled the doorbell camera, cut electricity to the house, and you didn't wear body cameras. What were you guys trying to hide?
Mr. Chairman, we're not trying to hide things. In fact,
Sure
after
seems
Mr.
like it.
You
You guys cut electricity to the house?
after the
Oh,
after
that's
the,
a question.
I'm trying to answer. After the okay, if there's no question, that's fine. I'm sorry.
No, that is a question. Did you?
After the incident, we, along with the Little Rock Police, called for an independent investigation being done by the Arkansas State Police and the local prosecutor.
No, I
there.
asked-
That's
I
not
asked-
trying to
I
hide
asked-
anything.
I asked 3 questions. Why'd you put the tape on the doorbell camera? Why'd you cut the lights? And why didn't you wear the body cams? What are you trying to hide?
And Mr. Chairman, the reason that we called for the investigation is we're not trying to hide anything. The reason I'm not going to talk about what's going on in that investigation is to respect its independence and out of fairness. There's a reason for the Department of Justice policy that's existed for so many decades about not commenting on pending matters. It's not fair to people, and it risks the perception that people are trying to influence
how about
the
this one? Why'd you ignore the rules? Because don't the rules say you should only use a no-knock entrance into a property if it's the only way, if it's the absolute best way to do it? I mean, I could read from Ms. Monaco's directive. Limit the circumstances in which agents may seek to enter a dwelling pursuant to a warrant without complying with the knock and announce rule because of the risk posed to both law enforcement and civilians. So you want to limit this. Why'd you guys do it all in 57 seconds?
Respectfully, with respect to what I said before, is that we are not trying to hide anything. An independent agency is investigating it, and we, pursuant to longstanding policy, are not going to comment.
The Department of Justice has already told us you guys weren't wearing cameras. I'm just asking why.
For the cameras, our body-worn camera policy, I can talk about that. I think I can answer the question without talking about this case.
You can talk about some things relative to the investigation, but not others. We want all the answers to what's going on here.
I will tell you, with respect to the body-worn camera policy, the Department of Justice announced that policy when it was announced, as we have communicated to your staff and you. It was announced that it would be phased implementation. ATF is implementing that policy. We've implemented it in just under a third of our field divisions. We have not received 3 separate requests for program funding from Congress to do so, but we are still doing it. I watched a hearing a couple of weeks ago where your fellow chairman...
Did the Little Rock police officers who accompanied you on this raid, did they wear body cams?
Again, not commenting on this specific case, but in general, the Department of Justice written policy allows local law enforcement on these types of operations, short-term operations, to follow their own guidelines and policies, if they wish, in body-worn cameras. And what I wanted to say is...
Their policy was to wear them. They weren't wearing them that day. We want to know why. Did you tell them not to wear them?
Mr. Chairman, again, It is simply unfair at this point while there's a pending investigation.
It's a simple question. We
it-
just
it-
want to know why they weren't following the rules. Their rules say wear body cameras. Your rules say wear body cameras. You weren't wearing body cameras. I go back to my original question. What were you trying to hide? We saw the video where you walked up and you put the tape on the doorbell. We know there were no lights to the foyer area. We have Mrs. Malinowski here who can testify to that. And we know you weren't wearing body cameras. What were you hiding?
Again, Mr. Chairman, we're not hiding anything. And with respect to the body-worn camera policy, the people there
Why on the
hadn't been rolled
12th?
out.
Why on the 12th did you not go and search the home? You were all circled up, ready to go, but a week before, on the 12th of March, you don't go. You go on the 19th. Why'd you decide not to go on the 12th?
Mr. Chairman, these operations, and by the way, we do about 11,000 operations each year. They're very dangerous operations. ATF doesn't do anything that is not dangerous. Well, it's not quite true, but many of them are very, very dangerous. And those operations are handled by people with decades of law enforcement experience. They plan them, they look at things.
Director, you got to admit, this is a little unique. You got a citizen, the highest paid official in the municipal government, Little Rock, Arkansas, making $260,000 a year, running the airport. No criminal background history, nothing, and he's dead at a pre-dawn raid when it sure looks like you could have served this search warrant when he wasn't there, but you decided not to. You decided to wait till he was home when you did it on March 19th. And as a result, Mr. Malinowski is no longer with us.
Well, first of all, let me just say this, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, any time that there's a loss of life, that is a profound incident. And of course, on behalf of just myself, ATF, and all law enforcement, we are very sorry when those things happen. Also, an agent was shot that day, and I'm sure you are sorry that that occurred also.
Of course, all the more reason to follow the no-knock warrant, not to have a no-knock warrant take place and follow the rules.
Mr. Chairman, as somebody who has worked with law enforcement for decades, there's a great temptation when a horrible incident happens to prejudge. Sometimes people even try to use it to advance agendas. The cops who are in the field and the family
I just want the answers. My time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dettelbach, thank you for your service. Many of my colleagues and I have been strong proponents and supporters of the use of body cameras and funding for those cameras. And so in some ways, it's rather surprising to read that Chairman Jordan recently criticized you, he just did it today, about body cameras and what happened to them, why they were not being worn. But meanwhile, House Republican Appropriations Committee Chair Hal Rogers just last month criticized your budget request for its department-wide emphasis on equipping federal agents with body cameras. Is there anything in response that you would like to say to Chairman Jordan, who supports the use of body cameras, versus Chairman Rogers, who wants to defund the use of body cameras?
Well, it's not my position to get in the middle of two chairs, but I will say this. Anybody, Chairman Jordan or anybody, we've been implementing this policy for several years. Anybody who wants to support it, I welcome to the effort.
And we need to fund it. And let me just move on, because there's been allegations that this gentleman who the chairman just discussed, Mr. Malinowski, suggesting that he was just a hobbyist. You know, we call him an unlicensed gun dealer, but they say he was a hobbyist and a firearms enthusiast. In your opinion, is someone who buys and then almost immediately resells at least 150 firearms over a 3-year period a hobbyist or an unlicensed gun dealer? Are they a hobbyist or an unlicensed gun dealer?
My opinion and your opinion and others' opinions are not what counts. What counts is the federal judge's opinion, who reviewed the search warrant affidavit here and found probable cause that 2 separate federal laws had been violated relating to unlawful firearms acquisition and dealing. And in that affidavit, which is public, some of the things that are set forth are that Mr. Malinowski had not obtained a license, that he obtained about 150 firearms in the period prior to this incident, that he sold a good number of them, some one day after he had obtained them, that one of those firearms was found on the person of a 15-year-old Norteño gang member in California. Another was sold in the backseat of a car in Little Rock to a convicted robber. Others were found on a drug dealer in California, a kilo of marijuana, other drugs in the back, baggy scales consistent with distribution. And so, respectfully, these are not victimless crimes, and it is up to Congress and the judge to make that determination. Those agents were present pursuant to the terms of a federally judicially approved warrant. The time they were there was approved. The day they were there was approved.
Let me ask you this. Do you have any idea how many unlicensed gun dealers, just like Mr. Malinowski, are operating in this country, selling multiple tens of hundreds of firearms yearly?
I don't. We can get back to you with we recently published a national firearms trafficking report that talked about the fact that the percentage of people who are trafficking in this manner has now grown to be the #1 way that people are unlawfully dealing firearms. So 40% of all our criminal trafficking cases deal with the notion of people engaged in the business of dealing without a license. That has grown over time.
Okay,
let
me get this question in. Prior to your confirmation in 2022, there had been a 7-year lapse between confirmed ATF directors to the time when you were confirmed. And during that 7-year period, the crime rate and violent crime rate in the country went up and was going up. And then COVID hit, which caused it to recede for a second. And then you were appointed. It's not a mere coincidence, is it, that your appointment and confirmation has resulted in a decrease in crime, in violent crime?
To me, it's the men and women out in the field who are doing the work. I have the privilege to lead them, and I give all the credit to the brave ATF agents and police officers who are out there risking their lives. But thank you for saying this, but it really is them who's doing the work.
Well, without leadership, it's hard to get things done, and I thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe with us today, Ms. Malinowski, if you're out there, would you please stand? I'd like to recognize you, Ms. Malinowski. Her first name is Mayor, Director. Would you like to stand up and look at her and apologize?
I've already said, of course, whenever these things happen, it's a tragedy. Mm-hmm. Of course we're sorry. Everybody is sorry that this occurred.
Yeah, look at her, don't look at me.
It doesn't mean that, I'm trying to also speak into the microphone. It doesn't mean that we can adjudicate this here today. There's an investigation going on. But of course, everybody, and everybody feels bad. I'm sure that a federal agent was shot, not shot at, shot that day. Those things are hard facts for all of us.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to enter something into the record. Your testimony, you say guns are the leading cause of death for children in the U.S. Not according to Snoops. It's a far-left publication. It is traffic crashes. Could I have that entered into the record?
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so very much. I was a sheriff, 8 years, as in law enforcement 30, conducted a lot of search warrants. My agency, I would not allow for no-knocks. Just didn't allow it because what we've seen over the past several years, when you have these SWAT teams looking like ninjas coming to doors at 6 o'clock in the morning, it just could cause some problems. You stated in your testimony just a few minutes ago, 11,000 of these a year. Very dangerous, done with very experienced agents, right? What policies do you have when you are going to execute search warrants, arrest warrants, to mitigate risk? Mitigate risk.
Yeah, Congressman, First of all, we do a very, very thorough job of training, which is, of course, as you know, as a sheriff, very important. Second, we have operations planning. We have review of the operations.
Executing a search, well, thank you. Executing a search warrant pre-dawn, early in the morning, knowing people are going to be in bed, how does that mitigate risk? Especially when you do it and it's a no-knock.
So Congressman, as a former sworn sheriff, I assume you would agree with me that police are entitled to due process also.
I tell you what it appears to me is what I've seen from the federal government, whether it's ATF or the FBI, doing search warrants or arrest warrants on J6ers, going in there with flashbangs, with the big Bearcats. I had a Bearcat, I know what it is. And having agents come out looking like they're Ninja Turtles for combat. I think not only are you scaring the hell out of the entire neighborhood, but when you kick down or break down a door and you don't even announce who you are, what do you think is going to happen? This was Mr. Malinowski there to try to protect his family. He didn't know. If you would have called him, sir, had a casual conversation, were you aware that he had no criminal history?
Sheriff?
I just want to ask a question. Are you aware, did you know the gentleman had no criminal history? No prior?
Am I aware sitting here?
Yes. Were you aware of it?
In firearms trafficking cases, and people who are dealing without a license and buying 150
I'm sure there are a lot of bad hombres
they
out
would
there.
not have a criminal.
I'm trying to focus on Mr. Malinowski. Were you personally aware that he didn't have a criminal history?
Again, I'm trying to answer your question directly.
Obviously, it's quite clear you weren't. It's quite clear you weren't. And I want to talk about mitigating risk, but were your agents wearing body cameras that day?
Again, I've tried to say this. I'd like a chance to answer this. The entire field division that covers Arkansas had not yet been phased in.
You have a budget. Try to convince the American people you don't have the do-re-mi to put body cameras on your agents that are conducting 11,000 warrants. These are dangerous you've got 11,000 of them out there, and you had a budget last year of $1.672 billion with a B. And you're telling me, I'm sorry, folks, I can't provide this transparency to the American people. I can't because I don't have the budget to do so. The American people, there's a problem right now with law enforcement out there. And I have the picture and the image of every law enforcement officer that's been killed in the past 3.5 years, and there's way too many. There's way too many on my wall.
We agree.
And so we have body-worn cameras. And why do we do that? Because there is a lack of trust between the police and the communities they serve. So when you provide these cameras, there's no he said, she said. It's all on record. And you didn't have your body cameras on that day. I'm telling you, it stinks to high heaven. I highly recommend you cooperate with this committee and you try to explain, other than this, I don't have the money to do so and I'm phasing it in. Buddy, you got to get your priorities, reshuffle your priorities and get your priorities in order. And I highly recommend you get body cameras on every one of those individuals that are searching these warrants, because it seems like there's a cover up here. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Cray, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this most important hearing. Mr. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here today. Ms. Malinowski, I just want to say prayers are with you, with your family in this very difficult moment. I hope beyond the heated debate that we're having here today, we actually come up with better public policies to minimize the loss of life in these public safety enforcement actions. I also, Mr. Dettelbach, would like to know what's it going to take to get those body cameras out in the field. How fast can we do it?
We have them across 1/3 of the United States, having received no program increase at all. And we take that money and we balance it with stopping gangs that are killing people, stopping cartels, as Chairman Rogers pointed out with, that are the most dangerous organizations in the world, going after trigger pullers, homicide cases, carjackings. So we have made programmatic requests that are open to the public. $13 million in 2023, $37 million.
How fast can we get them out to the other 2/3 that don't have
Right, I'm saying we have a pending request for a programmatic increase of $37.8 million. It's the same request we made last year that was not given.
How long do you think it's going to take to implement? How long will this take to implement?
Currently, with what we have now, without anything else, we will be implemented across the country by end of 2026. If there's more resources, we can try to speed that up. But it's
I,
not
as a
just
member of Congress, hope I'm speaking for a few folks here, hope that we can, expedite body cams being worn by our agents out there. This is an important issue. Love to work with you however we can to make sure that happens. And if I may, I'm going to ask you my first question, which is, how do you guys work with state, local, international agencies to protect our public?
Congressman.
You were out in Orange County recently, my part of the town.
I was, and we there got to recognize work of the Orange County Violent Crime Task Force, which is a great example of how we work shoulder to shoulder with a variety of local police departments. And what we do is we target the worst of the worst. So there was a case out there I remember hearing about. It was a series of Hobbs Act robberies that resulted in the death and murder of clerks at 7-Elevens, I believe. And that's a case where we partner with local law enforcement. And ATF has a little bit of a different way of doing this. If the most appropriate punishment is in the state courts and it's murder, that's fine with us. We're not looking for necessarily only federal cases. We look to do the
Directly,
case.
let me interrupt you. I've got a couple
Sure,
more
of course.
questions here. August 22nd, I sent you a letter requesting your help, your partnership, specifically on a gun buyback program, voluntary gun buyback program that we implement in my district. Didn't get the support there, and I think it's important because this is a program where citizens voluntarily show up, free market, here's $200, here's a weapon I had at home that I haven't touched in 40 years. Yet ATF, have you been working on those, or what is it that we can do to get you to work with us on those very successful programs?
So with those programs, and I think, of course, we value public safety and we value state and local agencies' determinations of what protects them. With respect to gun buyback programs, that's usually a decision and a program run by the state and local agencies, not the federal agencies.
We need your help in executing those.
Well, sometimes agencies can and do apply for burn grant money that can support their comprehensive plans, but ATF does not get involved in the actual operation of gun buyback programs. That is done by state and local authorities.
We'll talk some more later, but I do think these are important programs. You get guns off the street, guns that people don't want anymore. They'd rather have $100, $200 in their hand as opposed to a weapon. Cost effective, nobody gets hurt, and we do need your help. It's local, but we need ATF's database to make sure when those guns are brought back, we can run them through a database to see if they've been involved in any crimes, to make sure that those are guns that we can take off the street without destroying evidence. Go ahead, sir. I've got 20
Congressman,
seconds.
thank you. We will work with you. I commit to you that we will get back to you and your staff on that.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield the rest of my time.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize myself now. Director, you accused a dead man of a crime of illegally selling in the back seat a weapon. And would I hear that correctly?
Respectfully, what I did was talked about the public search warrant affidavit that was filed and proved by the judge.
I understand, but you're standing by your search warrant. You're standing by the fact that in the search warrant, you're alleging that he had committed a crime. Is that correct?
Chairman, respectfully, I was making the point that a federal magistrate...
You're not being respectful. Answer the question. The question is, did you allege that he had committed a felony, a crime, in your affidavit?
The judge did find that.
Okay. Well, I'll take that as the judge found it because you alleged it. So you alleged a crime, but you didn't seek to arrest him, did you? Did you have an arrest warrant for Mr. Malinowski?
My understanding...
That's a yes or no, Director.
My understanding is that there was not an arrest warrant. I don't have the full investigative file, but that is my understanding.
You came here, you knew we were going to ask, you saw yesterday, and now you're playing one of the games that the chairman and I didn't like during Fast and Furious. We don't like it now. If you want to be back here again, because you can't seem to know what you should know, what Mrs. Malinowski deserves to know, if some group of 10 carloads of people showed up and kicked in a door in the dark of night, and somebody came and shot at them,
we wouldn't be talking about somebody getting shot in the toe. We'd be talking exclusively about a planned murder of somebody who may or may not be armed, but who had every right to have weapons in their home, an expectation they had weapons in their home, an expectation that they might use it. All of that, you don't have to be ATF to know. So let's go back on track here again. If you had a belief that he had committed a crime, and if your intent was to arrest him, then that would explain why a week earlier you called off an already authorized search because you were only going to search for the weapons, you weren't going to search for him. Isn't that correct?
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I am not able and will not. It's not fair to do this during the pendency of a criminal investigation.
No, look, it's always, I'm sorry, but DOJ and you guys, it's always, you can go on forever. Hunter Biden's over. Why didn't you do a no-knock on him at his home with the vice president?
To be clear, this isn't our investigation. We in the Little Rock Police asked an outside investigation be conducted by the Arkansas State Police. It's their investigation. The district attorney is going to review that.
And I hope they appropriately find that in spite of qualified immunity, that you blew it badly enough that, in fact, criminal charges should be considered.
I hope they just find whatever the truth is.
What is the penalty for the crime alleged on the affidavit for selling a weapon not as a licensed dealer? What's the penalty?
Oh, my Lord. Mr. Chairman, I believe it's a 10-year felony, and there are two different crimes. It might be a 5-year and a 10-year felony.
Okay.
I want to get back to you to make sure that there's a series of statutes that run all in a row there. I want to make sure I'm not mixing up the statute.
5 years or it's 10 years. It's not a death penalty. Is that correct?
There is not a death penalty for that statute, no.
Okay. So Mr. Malinowski was not in any danger of being executed for what he is alleged to have done and no longer can defend himself because he's dead. But he was killed doing what any normal citizen does when people enter their home in the dark of night and they don't know who they are. If you had body cameras, maybe Mrs. Malinowski didn't hear right. Maybe you said police and identified yourself. Maybe he said, I don't care, and maybe he fired the shots. I don't believe that, and I don't think you do either. I believe he had every real belief that he was defending his wife and family. He fired warning shots, a ricochet hit a police officer or an ATF agent, and you killed him. Those are the facts. I have been investigating ATF for many years, and ATF agents have, rightfully so, and with great trepidation, I'm sure, come forth and been our whistleblowers. And we've consistently seen there are two ATFs, the one we need and want and deserve, and the one that plays fast and loose, like 10 cars going in deliberately with a warrant that did not entitle an arrest, when in fact, if you wanted to arrest him, it would have been reasonable to arrest him at work and simultaneously go into his home. If you had done that, he'd be alive today, and we'd be talking about other things, including whether you acted legally. With that, I yield back and recognize Ms. Scanlon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Director, for your testimony here today. The ranking member mentioned that every single day, 120 Americans are shot and killed, and more than 200 are wounded with gunfire. Those numbers aren't statistics. Every one is an American with a family and neighbors and friends. Yesterday morning at 8:30 a.m., a gunman killed 2 people and injured 3 others at a small family-owned business in Chester, Pennsylvania, right down the street from my office. 5 people were shot. Their coworkers and community were traumatized just for showing up at work in the morning. This unrelenting, unnecessary daily toll of gun violence is hitting families in every corner of every community across our country. Yesterday, it happened in Chester, a post-industrial city that straddles Interstate 95, which is known in law enforcement as the Iron Pipeline, because it's the route that gun traffickers regularly use to smuggle weapons from states with weak gun laws to states with stricter ones. The senseless violence is outrageous, but it's not inevitable. There are things we can do. This violence is enabled by lawmakers who choose to do nothing, who block legislation in the wake of tragedy after tragedy, while the American people are crying out for real action. Whenever Democrats try to explore how Congress can act to stem this uniquely American carnage, our Republican colleagues say the solution is to enforce the laws that are already on the books. But here we are once again in a hearing in which Republicans are attacking ATF, the law enforcement agency charged with primary responsibility for enforcing gun safety laws across our country. And it comes while our Republican colleagues have bills to abolish ATF and have succeeded in getting cuts to its budget. So, Director Dettelbach, I want to turn our focus to what might be real solutions and your agency's role in helping to implement them. You spoke in your testimony about a 1,000% increase in ghost guns linked to crimes over the past 5 years. Whenever I speak to our local law enforcement, including last night, they talk to me about how worried they are about the rapid proliferation of ghost guns. Ghost gun recoveries increased by over 400% in Philadelphia between 2019 and 2021. Our Delaware County Police busted a gun trafficker who was building and testing ghost guns in an apartment across the street from our county courthouse. And our Montgomery County Police recently busted a whole ghost gun trafficking ring. These fully functioning, untraceable firearms can be bought without a background check. They can be ordered online and in less than an hour become a firearm as deadly as any sold by a gun dealer. And that's why they've become, as you noted, the weapon of choice for people who might be otherwise barred from purchasing a gun, for criminals. So am I correct that ghost guns look like regular guns and shoot like regular guns and kill like regular guns?
You are.
Okay. Now, can you explain why they're posing such a danger to the American public and why ATF determined it was necessary to issue a rule amending the definition of frame or receiver to ensure that ghost guns are treated like other equally lethal firearms under our laws?
Congresswoman, the reason is, as you said, under our laws. Under the Gun Control Act, Congress specifically provided that items that were readily convertible to being operable firearms should be treated as firearms. The market was out there producing items that were readily convertible, and they were being sold without background checks. I did myself. I took one of these kits and put the gun together. My spouse will tell you not that handy around the house, but it was very easy for me to make a firearm, take it to the range, and fire it. These are firearms that shoot and wound and kill like firearms that are sold in the traditional manner. Congress anticipated that problem. The market changed, and we issued a rule to make sure that Congress's statute was appropriately enforced.
And we appreciate that, given the constant innovation that we see from gun manufacturers and those who seek to evade the existing laws. If we were to wait for Congress to catch up all the time, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from ATF's Acting Deputy Assistant Director for Public and Governmental Affairs, in which he responded to your letter regarding the execution of the search warrant on Mr. Malinowski's residence and about ATF's compliance with DOJ's body-worn camera policy.
Without objection.
Okay, just so you're aware of which letter it is, it's the one May 21st that responded to your request, which you referenced earlier.
Without objection.
Thank you, and it discusses the funding necessary.
Got it.
Got it. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the ATF has a final rule. I think the comments and the rule itself accumulate to about 466 pages that define who is engaged in the business of firearms dealing. So how many firearms does someone have to sell to be engaged in the business of firearm dealing?
Congressman, as you know, that matter is being litigated in several courts. So sticking to what's already in the public record, the rule itself is 16 pages, skipping lines. And there's about, as you say, over 400 pages of explanation.
Yeah.
And so there are factors that are conduct-based, not numerical-based, but conduct-based. We received many comments. One of the comments that we received was from, I think, Senator Cornyn, who expressed a view that there was no numerical threshold. Others had a different view.
In the House Judiciary Committee, we probably won't look to Senator Cornyn as the oracle of all things gun rights. But, so you're saying there really is no number?
I'm saying that Congress, our job is to implement the statute that Congress writes.
But
Congress
just like for a regular
didn't
person that one form or another acquires guns, and they're trying to figure out how many of these guns do I sell before I have to register as a dealer? What you're saying is there is no bright line there.
I'm saying that there is now more information than ever in the form of that rule for specific conduct-based.
I think just for a regular person, more information than ever is probably less helpful than if you sell 3 guns, you're not a dealer, and if you sell 4 guns, then you are a dealer, right? And this rule that you guys have drafted, it's currently enjoined, right? It has no effect?
There are 3 cases that I know of, maybe more going on now. One of the judges has issued equitable relief.
So in Texas, a judge has stopped the implementation of this law for 3 reasons. One is that there's no minimum requirement, and the court has found, this court in Texas, that you aren't just giving effect and life to Congress's statutes. You've in fact exceeded your authority, because Congress would have never allowed some sort of sliding scale where 16 pages of single-spaced whatever determines whether or not you're a firearm dealer, not how many guns you sell. There's a second reason that court in Texas said that this would not have effect, and it's that actual profit is not a requirement of the statute, only the predominant intent for profit. How do you understand that ruling?
Again, that's in litigation. The Department of Justice's positions on each and every one of these matters is public. It is laid out in many, many pages of briefing. And so I would ask people to look at our briefs that we filed in the court, and I would commend your attention to them.
If someone is just trying to figure out whether or not they have to get a federal license or be subject to your guys breaking their doors down and potentially killing them, you would think that you'd want that to be easily understandable. And here, even if someone isn't turning a profit, but they might want to turn a profit, they could be subject to this regulation, and the court found that troubling. And then the third reason the court identified is that your rule doesn't just give meaning to Congress's statute, but that, quote, arbitrarily eviscerates the safe harbor provision. So there's a safe harbor provision of this law that says if you're just engaged in the occasional sale or exchange or purchase of a firearm for a personal collection or a hobby, that this regulatory structure wouldn't affect you. But what the court is saying here in blocking your rule is that you have eviscerated the safe harbor that exists for the hobbyist. Do you have a reaction to that ruling?
Again, yes, our position is not that, but it's under litigation. We have filed extensive.
I know, but here we
briefs on
are.
this.
Make your argument. Well, I mean, they're sitting here in court trying to figure out what Congress means. What we're saying is there should definitely be a bright line in terms of guns. You shouldn't have to have this pondering question about profit motive, and you shouldn't eviscerate the safe harbor. That's what we're saying. So what's your argument as to why the safe harbor should be eviscerated?
Our argument is to look to the statute that Congress wrote. The statute that Congress wrote, and I just want to make clear that people understand this, there was an earlier comment about the word livelihood. That is not in the law anymore that Congress wrote. Congress took that out of the law. It doesn't exist anymore. So we start with the statute. That's where things always begin and end,
I know you started with the statute, but what this court is saying is that you have exceeded the statute. You've done it in a way that eviscerates the safe harbor, that blurs the lines, and that creates no discernible way for people to comply with the law. And the reason I think you guys are doing that is you want to make it more difficult for people to engage in the legal, lawful, and constitutionally contemplated manner to transfer firearms, and you're trying to criminalize an entire enterprise. And that's why you see us trying to curtail some of your funding and your authorities. I see my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized. Ms. Shah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director Dettelbach, thank you for coming before the Judiciary Committee again. I really appreciate it. I know that the work that you do really saves lives. I know that, and it protects our communities and helps many of us sleep a little bit better at night, and me in particular. I, for one, as well as many of my colleagues here, we do truly understand that the ATF plays a pivotal role in preventing gun violence by removing gun traffickers from our neighborhoods, ensuring that only lawful and abiding gun owners can purchase firearms, and assisting law enforcement at every level in solving gun crimes. And this committee has had many field hearings on victims of violent crimes, and well, it's ATF's job to do so, to do that very thing, to bring our perpetrators to that are violent crimes, to bring them to justice. The most logical thing for us to do today is find ways to support you, to support ATF's mission to reduce violent gun crimes. We should not defund, or we should not abolish the ATF, the very agency that's actually eliminating any semblance of need for victims of violent crime hearing anywhere in this country. And today we need to hear from you, Director, you know, if you can just tell us, we need to find out from you how we can actually assist you and support the ATF and its mission to reduce illegal firearm use and purchases, eliminate firearm threats, and protect our families, our friends, and our fellow Americans. Director Dettelbach, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most significant gun safety legislation that we've had in almost 30 years, has made tremendous progress. And I've been monitoring the progress of this package of work in eliminating gun violence as a public health crisis. And the initiatives that have been set forth in this law include parts of my plan for the implementation of extreme risk protection orders, those programs, and also laws that ensure that firearms are not in the hands of those in court who have been found through the due process to be a danger to themselves or to the community. And then also funding for community violence interventions in that package of work as well, and working to close the gun show loophole. But my colleagues, Director Dettelbach, have touched on how ATF cuts have affected state and local law enforcement. But would you like to expand on that for us? Because this is really important and critical information that I think the country really needs to hear.
Protecting Americans from violent crime is at the core of everything we do at ATF. And that means that so many of our strategies and resources depend on supporting local law enforcement, sheriff's departments, police departments, state police. I go and meet with those folks everywhere I go all the time. And the things that we do help them to close homicide cases, arrest gang members, get carjackers in Philadelphia off the street, stop the southbound flow of firearms through our 9 trafficking strike forces on the border to the cartels that present a danger to public safety in all those towns, for all those sheriffs across the border. We do all of those things every day, and on top of it, our CJICs, our Crime Gun Intelligence Centers, which are being put up all over the country, are places where local, state, federal agents sit together, often with prosecutors, and evaluate violent crime cases in real time so that the next morning we can be out on the streets investigating the most violent people. Budget cuts make all of that less and harder. Everybody wants a CJIC. We can't give everybody a CJIC because we don't have enough money for that. And if we cut more money, we're cutting those crime gun intelligence centers that lead to operations that day, the next week, that get violent criminals off the street.
So am I correct in understanding then that you need full support and funding of the ATF?
Yes, not just me. The agents who are out there risking their lives need and deserve that support.
And might I say, being a mother who lost her son to gun violence, I will tell you that law enforcement worked very hard on our behalf. I know they do this work every single day, and I'm just really grateful for the ATF. I'm grateful for the law enforcement. I am grateful for those that are on the front lines every single day doing everything that you express, because it's vital, it's necessary, and this is a public health crisis. And thank you for the work that you're doing and all the agents and people that work with you to keep our community safe. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Director, have you ever been a cop?
Excuse me?
Have you ever been a cop?
I have not been a police officer. I was a prosecutor.
Yeah, so you don't have decades of law enforcement experience, but you said you worked with law enforcement, right? That's fair to say, right?
I was a prosecutor for over 20 years in 5 different offices.
You worked with law enforcement. You weren't law enforcement. So is it common for ATF to turn off the power to a location prior to executing a search warrant?
Is it common for us to do that?
Yeah.
I do not believe it is a common thing that we do.
You're the director. You either know it is common or you don't know whether it's common.
I thought I answered the question. I'm sorry.
Is it common?
My understanding is it's not common, and I want to be very careful to say I'm not commenting on any case because I'm not sure until the facts come in.
Did I ask you about a specific case, sir? I did not, did I? I asked you about policy. You just said it's not common. Next, does the ATF use RF frequency jamming technology to prevent the internet and cell phones from working?
Sir, I'm sorry.
Does the ATF use RF frequency jamming technology to prevent the internet and cell phones from working during the execution of a search warrant?
Again, I am not going to sit here, and I guess I maybe should have said this before, and comment on the tactics that we use when we go into dangerous places, because it provides a blueprint for criminals to hurt us.
Let's get this straight then. You told us you won't answer anything specifically about a case. Now you're saying you're not going to tell us generically.
Maybe we can contact your staff in private setting and have a conversation instead of broadcasting
next
for all the criminals.
Does the ATF use dynamic entry as their means for entry during the execution of a search warrant? Does the ATF still use dynamic entry as their means for entry during the execution of a search warrant?
Again, I don't think it's appropriate. We can communicate with you on these kinds of training issues. I just don't want to give a public blueprint for people tomorrow and the next day who are going to be facing law enforcement through the door to know how we're coming, what we're doing.
Do you assess pattern of life as a part of risk assessment conducted prior to executing a search warrant? Can you answer that one?
I think that's far enough afield that I could say, depending on the case, we can assess pattern of life at times, of course. Depends on the case, right? Some cases it's appropriate, some cases it's not. These are I don't do this, right? The career law enforcement people, as you pointed out, do this with decades of experience. I don't armchair quarterback them either.
But here's the deal. You're the director, and I would expect that you would know what the policy is. And looks to me, you've convinced me that maybe Mr. Nels was right. I'm not sure that I thought he was right. But you didn't want to tell us specifically about the Malinowski case. I got that. I think it's wrong. I think it's a false narrative. But then when I start asking you about policies, generic policies, now all of a sudden you don't want to answer those. So when you coordinate with local law enforcement you do coordinate with local law enforcement prior to the execution of a search warrant?
In most cases, yes. Certainly, most of our cases we're doing shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement.
So these are yes or no questions. Thank you for answering yes. Is it the ATF's practice to instruct law enforcement partners to turn off their body cameras when participating in search warrants with ATF?
ATF's written policies that are in our MOUs is that if a local law enforcement agency has a body-worn camera policy and we're going on one of these short-term operations, they are entitled to follow their own policy if they wish. That is in black and white.
Can you tell us the difference on how the ATF would handle a search warrant on a violent felon versus an individual who allegedly sold a few firearms without a license? Is there a distinction in your mind? Is that in ATF's approach?
In every case, we do risk assessment, and it's dependent upon all the facts and circumstances of any particular matter. So in every case we do it, but you can't boil it down to one or two things. It's a risk assessment that experts who are risking their lives conduct.
How does the ATF balance the need for operational security and the need for the safety to the public?
We have to do, you're asking about balancing, I think you said operational security, and we have to keep the public safe. That's obviously paramount. But police officers are entitled to go home alive at the end of their shift also. And we also have to make sure that we're doing that as well. You have to do both.
So you didn't answer the question. The question presupposed exactly what you just said. We know that you have to balance them. How do you balance them? That's the question. How do you balance them?
The answer is both are paramount, and we have to do both in each operation. But I will tell you this. There's no such thing for a police officer as no risk.
They sign up, we sign up, the agents sign up to risk their lives. And they often go into very dangerous situations in order to do that, so there's no way to mitigate all of their risk, sometimes very dangerous risk from any operation.
And we understand that, we appreciate that. Now, I have to say that you didn't answer Mr. Massey's and our letters to you. I'm hoping that you said you're going to give us additional responses to the questions I've asked you today. I would anticipate that you'd give more fulsome answers than you gave us regarding the pipe bombing issue.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here. One major cause of migration into the United States is instability and violence in parts of Central America, which is partly fueled by the flow of firearms from the United States into Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. ATF reported that more than half of crime guns recovered in Central America, 70% of crime guns in Mexico, and 80% of crime guns in Caribbean countries are sourced from the United States, fueling instability and migration. But my Republican colleagues have refused to support common sense gun safety legislation that would fight the flow of American guns across the southern border and help address the root causes of migration. Instead, House Republicans have continued to criticize the Bureau, undermine resources to allow officers to do their jobs, and oppose common sense gun safety legislation at almost every turn. Could you describe any recent or current trends that ATF has found regarding the flow of firearms from the United States into Mexico and Central America?
So ATF's job obviously includes firearms trafficking. And one of the types of firearms trafficking we're seeing, right, there's domestic firearms trafficking that goes to California and New York and places all over the country. There's also southbound firearms trafficking. And it is accurate to say, and we shouldn't be reticent to say it, it's the truth, that our firearms that are going across the border southbound are helping to arm the cartels.
That's right.
So what do we see? We have 9 task forces that are southbound task forces set up along the border. They work with state and local law enforcement, they work with DHS, and we have the opposite problem, right? Other people are trying to stop things from coming north. We're focused on stopping firearms trafficking going south. They're related sometimes. But Congresswoman, what we see is that criminal organizations, including the cartels, are using our freedoms against us. So they're developing straw purchasing networks, for instance, where they're going into firearms stores and sending somebody in there without a record, paying them a small amount of money, and getting them to buy large military-grade weapons, 50s, you know, that can be easily converted to machine guns down south, paying in cash and doing it over and over and over again. So what are we doing? We're working with firearms licensees across the southwest border and now increasingly elsewhere because the cartels adapt, right? One of the things you asked about trends, they're going elsewhere now, not just on the southwest border. They're going to other states to try to arm themselves. So these are disturbing trends. These are very sophisticated, vicious organizations, and the ATF and our partners are doing everything we can. Interdictions, southbound interdictions are up in double digits year over year. We're very proud of that. But we should not fool ourselves that the problem is solved. These are very wealthy, aggressive, violent entities.
Thank you. When you were here last year, we discussed your partnership with state and local law enforcement to implement the Stop Illegal Trafficking in Firearms Act, which Congress included in the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. You've spoken about some elements, but could you provide any other additional update on your extensive efforts to implement that legislation?
Yes. So there were 2 separate criminal statutes that Congress created. One of them was a straw purchasing statute, first ever. The other is the trafficking statute. Both have been exceedingly useful, both in individual cases of firearms trafficking and in larger organizational efforts with respect to cartels and criminal organizations all over the country. So these are tools that we continue to use. We continue to work with the U.S. Attorney's community in appropriate cases to get appropriate punishments in those matters. There are new statutes. And again, as I said, what I explained to everybody and what we explained to judges is that firearms trafficking is not a victimless crime. We don't see the victim in front of us. But so often, the firearms, 60% of those trafficked firearms are going to felons and prohibited people. And they're using to hurt innocent, law-abiding Americans. That's what we have to do to implement. We have to make people understand that the distributors are also responsible if they're breaking the law.
And just quickly, many of the guns recovered from crime scenes south of the border are bought legally in the United States. How can we stop that from happening, and what resources do you need from Congress?
Well, when a firearm is purchased legally in the United States and it crosses the border, that's a little bit different, right? That's a situation where those whose full-time job it is to police the border are probably the lead. At ATF, what we do is we try to focus on illegal activity, the black market in firearms. Now, it's a little bit ambiguous, Congresswoman, because of course something can look like a legal sale, but it's really a straw purchaser.
Right.
And that's why when somebody walks into a store who doesn't even know really what to ask for, plunks down $12,552 in cash, and they're 20 miles from the border, and there's somebody waiting outside in the parking lot for them that dropped them off, that we depend on so many firearms dealers to figure out a way to pick up the phone and help us, and they do quite often. But then what happens is the cartels look for the one that won't do that, right? So we have to get the word out to a minority of dealers. Not the majority are trying to do the right thing, the minority of dealers, because the enemy, the cartels, are seeking them out to try to find weak links.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Dettelbach, I'm just curious. Have you expressed remorse to Mr. Malinowski's widow and family?
I'm sorry.
Have you expressed remorse to Mr. Malinowski's widow?
I will now, and I have before this morning, yes.
What have you said to them?
Well, I said it here in open forum, but
What
what
have
I
you said
said
to
was,
them
of course.
personally? Have you
when-
talked
of
to them
cour-
personally?
I'm sorry?
Have you talked to them personally? Have you expressed your sympathy to them personally? Or
Would
you
the
just make
gentleman
public
yield?
statements and issue press releases?
Would the gentleman yield?
No. Answer the question, please.
Yes.
He just did it.
All right, thank you. Did you know about this raid in advance?
We do 11,000 operations a year, and
did you know
I
about this
believe
one?
that, and it would
Did
be.
you know about this one, Mr. Dettelbach? Yes or no?
And I believe the first I heard about this matter was after the fact.
And who have you disciplined? What have you done?
Sorry?
What have you done in
is
response to
what we went together with the Little Rock Police, who were also present. We went and we requested an outside agency to do an independent investigation. We fully cooperated with that investigation. That investigation, my understanding is the file has now been turned over.
I think this committee is going to want to look into this matter in much greater detail. I need to press on. Let me just ask you a general question. What do you think is the purpose of the Second Amendment?
Like all the amendments, the purpose of the Second Amendment is to protect fundamental rights of Americans.
And you believe that a fundamental right of America includes the right to bear arms?
I believe that all the rights in the Bill of Rights are important and fundamental rights, including the Second Amendment.
Great. In the second half of 2021, only 34 inspections led to a firearms dealer having their license revoked. However, the number of qualifying violations dramatically increased to 252 in 2022 and jumped again to 407 in 2023. Now, either there's been an exponential increase in crooked firearms dealers since Biden took over, or there's been an exponential increase in zealotry by your agency. I assume you would say it's the latter.
The laws that Congress has passed and have been in effect say that willful violators of the Gun Control Act are subject to, they may have their licenses
We've
revoked.
seen an exponential increase. I mean, just off the charts since you took office. And that seems to coincide with a dramatic reduction in people willing to legally expose themselves to pre-dawn raids on their homes. The number of voluntary business closures post-inspection has risen sharply from 24 in 2021 to 69 in 2022 to 80 in 2023. Now, this tells me that this is a deliberate policy to drive firearms dealers out of the business, not only with the reign of legal terror, but in the case of Mr. Malinowski, the actual reign of physical terror as well. Now, I know you're not going to agree with that, but can you at least see how that appears to others?
Respectfully, I disagree. The enhanced enforcement policy, which is publicly available, the terms of it, state very clearly that we're not talking about paperwork violations. We're talking about willful violations that impact on public safety, like refusing to run a background check, selling to a felon, not respond.
What we're seeing is an exponential increase in actions against dealers, followed by an exponential increase in dealers just saying, this isn't worth the legal exposure, I'm out of here. What's involved in getting a federal firearms license?
There is a process to get a license, right? You fill out an application, you pay a $200 fee, and there's a compliance inspection, or not a compliance inspection, an application inspection that goes on. But just like the inspections and the process, for a revocation, for a compliance matter, there is ample due process. There are hearings that go on, and in our own hearings.
But it's a fairly lengthy process. Now, your agency's rule says, quote, that even a single transaction or offer to engage in a transaction, when combined with other evidence, may be sufficient to require a license as an FFL. What does that mean?
That is one sentence out of a 16-page rule.
Well, what does that
The
say?
rule says, this is a matter before the courts. Our positions on all of these things are in pages and pages of briefs that it would take far too long, and I know you have time limits, but I refer you to those briefs. It's not a secret, but what I would say to you is, it says in black and white, things that might lead to a determination under the totality of circumstances that somebody is engaged in the business, and things that don't.
So if somebody admires my gun collection and I say, you want to buy it, would that require an FFL?
There is a specific provision that Congress has passed that says that people who are bona fide collectors can liquidate their collections without becoming a licensee.
But that's not what this rule
But
says.
of course you would have to, and I think that's what you described, but you'd have to look at, obviously, the whole.
That's not what your new rule says.
Respectfully, I disagree. It says in black and white
Gentlemen,
that is allowed.
Gentleman yields back. Director, we've been at it an hour and 45 minutes. Just recognize if you need a break, just let us know, and we'll be happy to take a break. If not, if you're willing, we'll keep going. Before I recognize the gentleman from California, you were getting ready to say you had an outside investigation and you turned it over to, and you didn't say who's that's been turned over to.
I believe they publicly announced, the Arkansas State Police, that they turned over their investigative file to the 6th District Prosecutor's Office. It's Pulaski County, Arkansas, the state prosecutors. And I believe this is all public. I haven't had contact with them because I want to make sure that it's independent, right?
Yeah.
But I believe that they're reviewing it.
Okay.
That part, I think we know that they're reviewing it.
Got it. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Director, welcome. And I want to thank you and the brave men and women in law enforcement who serve your agency every day. And I've got some questions for you in a moment. But there's something that is imminent and I'm concerned about because it just put a target on the back of everybody in law enforcement at the federal level and the local level. And that is a statement that one of our colleagues made earlier this week. And we have jurisdiction over the FBI as well as the ATF. But Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia said, the Biden DOJ and FBI were planning to assassinate President Trump and gave the green light. Does everyone get it yet? What are Republicans going to do about it? This is quite a concerning statement from an elected member of Congress because this false statement creates the pretext for violence. It suggests to Americans, who, by the way, are armed to the teeth, we're a country where the most dangerous people have access to the most dangerous weapons, and it suggests to them that their own government and the people who wear the badge are out to assassinate the former president. And I just want to first clear up this falsity. And the FBI this week has issued a statement to do that. But first and foremost, the search at Mar-a-Lago, the former president was not there. And that was intentional. So if there was an effort to assassinate the former president, they went at a time when he was not there. Second, the former president was actually treated better than most people during a raid because the FBI didn't go in with their raid jackets. They wore polo shirts to show a little bit of respect for the former president and not make it a raid-like environment. Third, standard use of force procedures were followed during that search as they were followed in every search, including, fourth, the same search procedures and use of force policy that was used to retrieve documents at President Biden's Delaware residence. This is a pretext for violence, and I will yield to any of my colleagues who will join me in condemning it. I will yield to any colleague who will condemn the suggestion by Marjorie Taylor Greene that the FBI was out to assassinate former President Trump. Please condemn it, because if you don't, you are encouraging it, and you're co-signing it. Mr. McClintock, please.
Of course we do. What a ridiculous question.
What a ridiculous statement that she made.
I agree with you, and I
Thank
don't
you.
think there's anyone here who agrees with it.
Thank you.
Both sides have a lunatic fringe in their movement, ours and yours. And frankly, I find yours far more frightening because
I've never
it leads
heard
to
somebody
incidents
suggest
like
that
this.
we were trying to that the FBI was trying to assassinate a former president. I do appreciate, Mr. McClintock, you condemning. I would welcome anyone else who would condemn that. And we'll make this clearer when the
I
Attorney
would
General
also, however,
testifies.
condemn the instructions
And
to
reclaiming
use
my
lethal
time,
force
reclaiming my time,
in such an operation
reclaiming
or
my time,
conducting such
Director,
an operation at all.
reclaiming my time. Director, the former president stated last week at an NRA convention that every single Biden attack on gun owners and manufacturers will be terminated on my first week in office, perhaps my first day. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. What does this mean for parents in America as it relates to whether our kids are going to be sheltering in place and hiding under their desks for the rest of their time at school if this were to happen?
Congressman, I can't and won't get involved in electoral politics. What I said in my opening statement, though, I think hopefully people from all sides of questions can agree on, which is we see progress being made. We see violent crime going down. We have a strategy that appears to be working. My hope is that we can all come together, and maybe there's policy disagreements on different things. We can all come together, though, on the fact that we are driving down violent crime all over this country and double down on the strategies that are working. That's my hope. The things that are working, let's stick with, because the numbers show that real lives are being saved.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is violent crime going down?
Excuse me?
Is violent crime going down?
According to the data I've seen, violent crime is going down, yes.
That's not what Director Wray told us a number of months ago when he was here before us.
What I've seen in recent numbers, violent crime is going down. There's in the 175 cities covered by the major city chiefs, there is double-digit reductions in violent crime. I was in Baltimore at the turn of the year, a 19% reduction in homicides. LA down 13%.
So when we had a hearing up in New York City just what was that, about a year ago, we heard from city councilors and others that they said that the police are not charging crime now because a district attorney would not prosecute that crime. And here, let me give you an example from a city in our state. Here was a statement from the district attorney in Milwaukee County. This is a number of years ago, but he still continues to be the district attorney. Is there going to be an individual I divert or I put into a treatment program who's going to go out and kill somebody? You bet. This is the same guy that led off the Waukesha Christmas killer who drove a vehicle through, killing 6 people just a couple years ago in a Christmas parade up in Wisconsin. Are you sure violent crime's going down?
I believe the numbers bear out that violent crime is going down. I think last year saw the most precipitous drop in
So
violent
you cited
crime.
Minneapolis here in your testimony, whether it's indicting 45 Minneapolis gang members involved in murder and drug trafficking. We just had they have a district attorney in Minneapolis also that does not prosecute crime. She'll go after cops, as she's doing right now with a cop who was doing his job, and she's going after him now. Are you sure those indicted 45 Minneapolis gang members are actually going to be charged with a crime?
I was there to
Sure of
announce
that?
the indictment myself, along with the U.S. Attorney, along with the Chief of Police, along with the Sheriff. They're already indicted, and I hope they go to jail for a long time.
And I think you said that there's more activity with the cartels. You commented about this Sinaloa cartel. Is there more activity going on down by the southern border?
What we see is the flow of firearms. Our job is, right, to stop firearms trafficking, which goes from the United States to Mexico. And we have seen an increase in our number of seizures. Now, that increase could be due to the fact that we're spending a lot of time and resources trying to stop that. But yes, we see a continuing problem.
Yeah, Director Ray would echo that a number of months ago, or I should say you're echoing what he said. He said, we are seeing a significant increase going on related to the southern border. So you would basically agree with his comment, his general comment in regards to that?
Yeah, with southbound traffic, it is a continuing threat.
You think the open border contributes to this?
So I am not in charge of the agency that controls the border, but with respect to southbound traffic, that's things going.
So have you shared that with the Attorney General?
Well, I think everybody Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Have you shared it with the Department of Homeland Security?
We work together on all of these task forces with the Department of Homeland Security, these southbound task forces. They have agents and officers sitting with us doing that interdiction for southbound firearms trafficking.
So they know this problem is getting worse.
Well, they're part of the fact of why the seizures are up, that we're interdicting more weapons than ever, double-digit increases last year in terms of southbound seizures.
So, Mr. Chairman, besides human trafficking, besides the terrorists that are coming across the border, we see another example here where the open southern border is making it potentially more deadly for Americans. We see these guns that are continuing to flow both ways across the border. And plus you have a border patrol that can no longer do their job as babysitters.
It is very rare. I'm sorry.
I'm going to close up here.
Sure.
If you have what would be your recommendation if somebody lied on their 4473 form? They dumped their pistol in a garbage can and it was in a school zone. What would be your recommendation for charging that person?
I think that echoes the fact of a publicly reported case. I'm not going to comment on a pending matter, and I think that question is aimed at that.
So it's an example of somebody that did something like that, and I'm sure it's happened before. What would you recommend they be charged with?
If a person out there intentionally lies on a 4473 form, they can be charged with the crime of lying on a 4473 form.
Dumped a pistol in a garbage can? So those are the facts of the case?
Again, I'm not going to comment on specific facts. If somebody lies on a 4473, I mean, that was part of the charges in the case that we discussed earlier that was the subject of so much discussion. That's public, but not commenting on the specifics, that's a crime.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to close real quickly. The dual system of justice in America, Hunter Biden versus Brian Malinowski. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Vermont has unanimous consent?
Yes, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. Milwaukee sees decline in homicides in 2023. This is WPR.
All right, without objection. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I also want to thank the gentlewoman from Vermont for providing this committee and obviously those who are watching it with some sense of real semblance of the actual facts on the ground with respect to the comments made by my colleague from Wisconsin. Director, I first want to say thank you for your service to our country. You've spent your career in law enforcement, obviously a former federal prosecutor. I'm grateful for the work that you and your agency does each and every day to keep communities across my district in Colorado and Rocky Mountain West and the entire country safe. You have more patience than I. I think it is awfully rich, and I'm not asking you to opine on this or to respond, but it's awfully rich for some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to lecture you, who've spent your career in law enforcement, leading one of the premier domestic law enforcement agencies now, to lecture you about crime and gun trafficking when they have worked vociferously over the last 17 months to defund the very agency that you lead that is charged with addressing gun trafficking, is charged with keeping us safe. I think it is shameful. How much did President Biden's fiscal year 24 budget request identify for the ATF? What was the total sum?
I believe that the number that I'm very familiar with is the amount of the cut, which was $47.5 million, that was the real salary and expenses cut, which is causing us not to hire agents, which is causing us not to be able to be out there with our state and local partners arresting carjackers and violent criminals. The request is 3 or 4 steps. It was a significant increase for ATF funding, and not only was the increase not granted, but ATF's budget was cut, and that's having these kinds of effects on our ability to fight violent crime that I'm talking about.
Well, you beat me to it, and thank you, Mr. Director, because I think you've provided the requisite clarity. $47 million cut. $3 billion less than what the president ultimately requested. $1.9 billion was the president's request in terms of funding for the ATF. Ultimately, it's about $1.6 billion, which meant in real dollars a $47 million cut.
Right. Went from 1.675 to about 1.625.
Correct.
And by the way, that happened halfway through the year because Congress hadn't passed a budget, and so we had to effectuate the entire $47 million cut in 6 months, which was also, Congress delays in passing these measures. I understand they're difficult, but for people running organizations, and many of you have run businesses, that is very, very difficult to effectuate a whole cut after somebody is giving you the higher budget for half the year and says, you make it all up in a half year.
Well, I'd like to hear any of my colleagues defend the propriety of pursuing that kind of cut to one of our nation's lead law enforcement agencies. The cognitive dissonance is astounding to me. I mean, I've listened for years to my colleagues on the other side claim that folks in our party don't support law enforcement, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. And yet, simultaneously, they now pursue a significant cut to the operations of the ATF. I'm grateful, and by the way, Director, I mean, this is outside of your bailiwick, so to speak, but they just released a budget a month ago that proposes severe cuts to local law enforcement as well. Rural sheriffs, rural police departments in my district, COPS grant program, which I'm sure you're familiar with, given your time as a prosecutor years ago. Program that is integral to enabling local law enforcement to do their jobs, to hire more officers. I think it's shameful. I'm grateful for what, as I said, you are doing. I wish I had more time to be able to spend or perhaps engage in a colloquy here around some of the regulations that the ATF has promulgated, which I support, to address some of the mass violence, mass shootings that we have tragically had in communities across the country, including in my community in Boulder, Colorado. But I would just say that the sum of my remarks is that I'm grateful for the work that you do. I'm grateful for the work that the law enforcement officers in your agency do each and every day. And you certainly will have our support. And I would hope that it'd be on a bipartisan basis. Hope springs eternal. We'll keep working towards that. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What's your budget this year?
The budget, I believe, is $1.625 billion was the most recent budget that was passed.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I'm troubled here by your new rule defining what a firearms dealer is or engaged in the business of selling firearms. isn't the purpose of it, or won't the result be that more people will be defined as being engaged in the business of selling firearms?
The purpose of the rule is to effectuate Congress's definition. Congress expanded the definition 2 years ago in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act.
What's the result going to be?
The result is going to be, I hope, increased compliance with Congress's statute.
The result is going to be subjecting more American citizens to the treatment that Mr. Malinowski unfortunately received from our federal government, which is you want to get more warrants to serve these no-knock raids on people who have not been convicted of anything, yet may be convicted on their doorstep to death. I want to address something in your rule here. I did find one thing that I think is sort of helpful, and I hope the other side of the aisle will read this. I want to give you time to look at this. The department, that would be the ATF, correct, in your rule?
I don't know what is this from the?
Yeah, this is from your rule.
The department refers to the Department of Justice.
Okay. The department also notes that the term gun show loophole is a misnomer in that there is no statutory exemption under the Gun Control Act for unlicensed persons to engage in the business of dealing in firearms at a gun show or at any other venue. I hope the other side of the aisle, this is the one useful thing that I found in 16-page rule and hundreds of pages of explanation, is to show people that there is no gun show loophole. Do you agree with the department and with your own rule here?
I agree that Congress never said, and has never said, and hasn't said now, didn't say before this, that somebody who is engaged in the business, those are the words there, can do that without a license depending on where they sit. But people have encouraged the perception, and we have seen an increased level of non-compliance among people who are either intentionally or otherwise breaking Congress's statute.
The only people encouraging this perception is the left side of the aisle in the media. There is no gun show loophole, and I'm glad you finally admitted that. Now I want to get to something else.
I've said that publicly, and there never was.
Okay, thank you. I want to get to something else in your opening statement, and maybe you want to read it back if it's written down. Can you tell me the fact that you were expressing or claimed that there are more that firearms are leading cause of death for children? What were your specific words in your testimony?
I'd have to look at my testimony.
Can you look at it?
I think it's children and youth, and it's in my longer statement that's in the record. Obviously, I'm summarizing a statement as the chair asked me to do. So it's in my longer statement, which has been entered into the record. I don't have it in front of me.
Can you define a child and youth?
There's child and youth. There's a statistical study that is the source of that, and we can get that to you. I don't know the specific site sitting here. We'll be glad to get that to you.
Yeah, the statistical study, according to news reports and Snopes, as Mr. Nails referred to, excludes infants under the age of 1 and includes 18 and 19-year-olds. Is that true?
I don't know. I mean, honestly.
You don't know your own statistic?
No, I don't know. Honestly,
why would that be
any
your
killing of
testimony to
children
Congress?
unacceptable?
Any killing of any person is unacceptable, except in self-defense. Are you including if a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old gang member came to a person's door and tried to attack them, that was self-defense? Are you including that in your statistic?
Congressman, firearms violence is a huge.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to let you make your public service statement. I want you to defend your sworn testimony. Are you claiming that 18 and 19-year-olds are children in your statistic?
And again, you have my statement.
Yeah, I have it. I'm asking you to explain it. Here's my other question. How many 18-year-olds who've committed a gun crime have you suggested be prosecuted as a minor?
We are a law enforcement agency. We're not the prosecutors.
Okay.
And in the federal system,
how many have you served? How many have
federal
you
system,
gone after? Okay.
The federal, respectfully,
18-year-olds.
we investigate crimes shoulder to shoulder with local law enforcement.
Are 18-year-olds children or are they adults?
Each state has its own
under the
rules
gun laws
as to when juveniles are prosecuted.
Federal gun
laws. As you may know, federal laws with respect to the prosecution of juveniles are exceedingly difficult. And you are correct that prosecution of juveniles
if you're implying this as adults, is rare in the federal system.
Here's the
And-
reality.
And
This is-
juvenile crime,
reclaiming my
juvenile
time.
crime is an increasing problem.
Belongs to the gentleman from California.
Reclaiming my time. Look, you're including in your statistic, whether you know it or not, 18 and 19-year-olds, but you would never claim that those are minors in the context of gun prosecutions. And the only way you can get the number of deaths attributable to firearms above other causes is by excluding under the age of 1 and including 18 and 19-year-olds, particularly gang members, and including self-defense. So with that, I yield back.
Someone yields back. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here. I want to thank you and I believe about 5,000 of your members, full-time employees at ATF. Just to put that number into some perspective, there are more than 6,500 sworn police officers serving just the city of Philadelphia, my home city. Would it be fair to call ATF a relatively small but mighty law enforcement agency, Director?
The people, those 5,000 plus people who work at ATF are incredible people. They are doing a mammoth job with very few resources. It's a dangerous job. Every single day, it's a dangerous job for them out there because of the types of cases that we often see, and they're doing a great job at it.
I agree with you. As you note in your testimony, ATF is in fact the only federal law enforcement agency with the sole focus of working with police and partners in state and local law enforcement to protect Americans from violent crime, correct?
We are the federal agency with the sole focus on violent crime.
I want to say to those of you in the room or who are watching on TV, if you're experiencing whiplash, I'm sure it is not lost on anyone in this room, anyone who cares about the issues around police and law enforcement. We are just 1 week removed from National Police Week. I sat over on the regal Senate side as we honored the fallen police officers. It's whiplash in this hearing. 1 week we honor fallen police officers, the next we want to defund law enforcement like you. From rooting out cartels, fueling the fentanyl crisis, to curbing gun violence, the #1 killer of American children, gun violence. That's what people on the other side of the aisle ought to be outraged about. The #1 killer of our children in this country, gun violence. And progress has been made, even though our Republican colleagues attempt to discredit and defund you. I want to turn to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. I'm so proud that we were finally able to do something, some small things around gun violence. We are weeks away from the second anniversary of this great act, June 25th. I was heartened to see that last month, ATF finalized a rule implementing the landmark legislation. Part of the rule overlaps with my bill, the Fire Sale Loophole Closing Act, which would prevent FFLs who have had their licenses revoked or denied from selling old business inventory guns without background checks. Some Republican lawmakers have raised concern that the final rule goes too far. Could you tell us, why is this rule necessary? Why do we need to know what happens to those inventoried guns?
Again, of course, as you know, the rule is under litigation, so I'm limited to the public record and what I can say. The text of the rule speaks for itself and should be looked at, and also the explanation, the hundreds of pages of explanation and the response to comments. With respect to that one part of the law that Congress passed, and as part of the Gun Control Act, if a dealer who is a licensed firearms dealer loses their license, right, the notion that that somehow for the person who loses their license can then not follow the Gun Control Act, right, is inconsistent with the structure of the Gun Control Act in many cases.
It's inconceivable.
So the idea is that everybody's playing by the same set of rules. There are so many dealers and collectors who are following the law out there. And part of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and part of our enforcement is to make sure that those who obey the law aren't being treated at a competitive disadvantage to people who are out there ignoring the law, right? It's only fair. There are so many people who are obeying the Gun Control Act, who are obeying the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And those who are out there ignoring it, just from a plain old business perspective, we have to have a fair marketplace where everybody obeys Congress's statutes.
I couldn't agree more. It's also common sense that if you've lost your license, you can't just get rid of your inventory without following the law.
Including background checks.
Exactly. What challenges has ATF faced in implementing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act? Litigation is clearly part of it, but what else?
I think when Congress gave us our new tools, which we're very grateful for, Congress didn't appropriate extra monies for us to enforce those particular new tools. We did get $1 million a year to work with the National Shooting Sports Foundation on the Don't Lie for the Other Guy campaign, which is an important collaborative effort we have with the industry. But the 500 defendants that we charged under the new statutes with our prosecutors and our partners, right, that's taking away from other priorities that we also still want to service. So again, when we at ATF are choosing what to do, Congresswoman, we're choosing between very important things. We're choosing between body-worn cameras and cartels. We're choosing between gangs and carjackings. Those are very important things that we are trying to balance.
I couldn't agree more. I honor all of your agents. I have a unanimous request, consent request, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Number one, you spoke about fallen ATF officers. And what I would like to enter into the record is a listing, multiple-page listing, of fallen ATF officers, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive fallen agents.
Without objection.
Over the years. I also have a unanimous consent request to enter this article from March of this year, ABC News, U.S. stats show violent crime dramatically falling.
Without objection.
And I'd like to also enter into the record an article around a child in Philadelphia just last month, 3-year-old child, sadly picked up a firearm and died from a shot.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank the chairman. Thank the director. I think as the director knows, I was a prosecutor under Project Safe Neighborhoods in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Worked closely with ATF in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. I share your sentiment about the patriotic Americans serving in ATF trying to stop violent criminals from moving drugs and using firearms against the law in ways that are undermining the safety and security of the American people. And I want to thank those men and women for what they do every day in that service. But would the director agree that there have been times where ATF have not gotten it right? I realize that with respect to the case we've already discussed with respect to Mr. Malinowski, that you're saying that's an investigation, but what about something like Fast and Furious?
So of course, like any agency, there are times where we don't get things right and can improve.
So a couple of questions for you, along these lines. I think it's really important for the American people to understand. Do you, as the director of ATF, do you believe that the American people have a constitutional right, an individual right, to keep and bear arms?
The Supreme Court has made it clear, and yes, the Second Amendment has been interpreted numerous times by the Supreme Court, just as you, there's more to it, but yes, what you have said, yes.
Okay, and so but you believe that. You interpret the Constitution that way.
I interpret all the laws the way that the Supreme Court says they're to be interpreted. And when the Supreme Court speaks on something...
Would you have said that about Plessy?
Congressman, I work for a law enforcement agency. I'm not a judge.
But
I
I'm just
accept
asking
the
you,
rulings of the court, including that one. I'm not dodging your question.
Do you, as the director of ATF, believe there is an individual constitutional right to bear arms?
Yes, there is one. The Supreme Court has said it.
It's along those lines. Do you, as the director of ATF, believe that the federal government should maintain a registry or otherwise track, catalog, keep records of the transactions of firearms conducted by the American people, such that you would know what firearms I possess?
Congress has explicitly forbidden ATF from keeping a registry, and we do not. Again, we obey the law. We don't make the law, we obey it.
Do you, as the director, believe that the federal government should track ownership of firearms among the American people?
Congressman, we follow the law as you put it, as you pass it. You have said we cannot have a registry. We follow that provision and will continue to as long as it's
As
the
the
law.
director of ATF, do you have a position on that? Should we track ownership of firearms?
As director of ATF, my position is if it's in the law, we follow it.
If I want to sell a gun that I currently own to a friend in Texas, do I need a license?
So getting into the specifics of the rule, which is in litigation. So first of all,
this ought to be a really simple question.
I understand. So you look at the totality of the circumstances. If we're talking about an isolated sale from somebody who is not engaged in the business of dealing firearms, you don't need a license.
All right. So if I, a citizen, this country, I live in Texas, I have a weapon and I want to sell it to a fellow Texan, on an isolated basis, do I need a license?
Again, if you are not engaged in the business of selling firearms, those are Congress's words.
If I post a sale for a firearm last year, okay, and I do that on some relevant website like TexasGunTrader.com, and I sell that weapon, I sell it for $500, and then I inherit a gun from my dad or from my uncle, and I inherit it last month, and it's like 6 months later, and I sell it, and I sell it for another profit. I sell it for $500. And then less than a year later, I have another weapon that I inherit or I've got and I decide I don't need anymore and I sell it. Is that engaging in the business? Is that engaging in activity that means I need a license?
I think pursuant to the clear language of Congress in doing this and to the things we've said in the rule, we specifically mentioned inheritance as one of the things that is not indicative of engaging in the business.
What if I have just 12, what if I have 12, 15, or 20 weapons and I sell 3 over the course of a year?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just saying, if I have about 50, let's assume I had 15 or 20 weapons and I wanted to sell 3 over the course of a year.
I think I'd
like to make money on
my
them.
reaction to what you're saying is that you look at it's very clear that you look at the totality of the circumstances. We can go through an endless series of hypotheticals. Hypotheticals aren't the way we address cases.
Do you understand, and I realize I'm over my time, do you understand why the average citizen sitting out there saying I've got 400 pages of rulemaking might not understand what they are allowed to do under the law when the director of the ATF can't look at a member of Congress and tell me yes or no emphatically whether or not if I sell a weapon or 2 weapons or 3 weapons or 5, whether or not I need a license? Do you think that's the way the law ought to be or the rules?
Respectfully, I believe that the rule that we have promulgated provides way more information and clarity than
400 pages?
Than just the 1 or 2 sentences that Congress provided. And we were seeing
And you
massive
can't even answer it.
non-compliance.
How can the average American know it?
Time the gentleman has expired.
We are in the business of knowing, and we would look at the whole case, and we would determine based on the, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Dettelbach, for being here the second time in over a year and for your commitment to keeping our communities safe. As requested by the Department of Justice, the ATF recently reported that over a 5-year period from 2017 to 2021, 68,000 illegally trafficked firearms were distributed across the United States by unlicensed dealers. The iron pipeline, which we've discussed earlier, specifically refers to guns smuggled up the I-95 corridor from the southern states to the mid-Atlantic and New England. It runs directly through my home state of North Carolina, which is one of the top destinations for gun traffickers. Now, we wouldn't know this information, which directly impacts public safety in my state, without the ATF's dedicated work to make data available to the public and to all of our law enforcement agencies. This data is a critical tool for local law enforcement to address gun trafficking. I also want to highlight the implementation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which, as we've heard, is one of the most significant steps Congress has taken to reduce gun violence in decades, giving law enforcement and prosecutors new means to hold gun traffickers accountable. I also want to note that both of North Carolina's Republican senators voted for the bipartisan Safer Communities Act in the last Congress. Building off this legislation is imperative, and it will take continued bipartisan consensus to do so. We've talked a little bit about the gun trafficking provisions in the Safer Communities Act, but I want to broaden that a little bit and ask you how gun trafficking intersects with drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl trafficking, and what ATF is doing to reduce not just gun trafficking and gun violence, but the menace of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs.
I've been involved with prosecution since 1991, and one thing that has stayed the same, and unfortunately I'm sure will stay the same, is that guns and drugs, illicit guns and drugs go together. Gangs, cartels, individual dealers, they are armed often as a means of enforcing their business practices, their unlawful criminal conduct, and punishing individuals who challenge them. Intimidating witnesses, you name it. So these things go together. With respect to fentanyl, that is also, it was true with crack, it's true with powder cocaine, true with heroin, it's true with opioids, it's true with fentanyl. And we worked alone and together with our partners on cases that involve narcotics trafficking all the time for that reason. Armed drug trafficking organizations are part of what ATF does. Just earlier this month, ATF made a case that resulted in members of the Sinaloa cartel going to jail for literally decades, I think one for life. We are routinely seeing fentanyl dealers and organizations that are armed to the teeth and that are threatening people's lives.
And so do you believe that the more we support efforts to stop gun trafficking, that will also help in our efforts to stop drug trafficking?
I know it.
I'm going to ask you a fun question since I know it's been kind of a rough day. If it was Christmas and you could be fully funded in the ways that you've requested, what would be your top 3 priorities and how would that make our community safer?
Since it's Christmas, can I get an extra 1 or 2?
Absolutely. You have 36 seconds.
We're the violent crime agency, so I think what I would start with is we know a strategy that's working. The crime gun intelligence strategy, working with state and local law enforcement, is working. We have to scale it, right? So we have 60 crime gun intelligence centers or so. We put out, I think, an extra 10 in the last year. I would put out crime gun intelligence centers. I would try to stand them up in numerous other places. Second would be to support them, we need better intel. Crime gun intelligence is driven by a couple things: the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, or NIBIN, and crime gun tracing. I would continue and ramp up our campaign to get sheriffs, to get chiefs, to get law enforcement officers all around the country to fully participate in the NIBIN and tracing free tools that we provide them. And I think, gosh, it's so hard. On the third, I would say, I think, I would double and triple down on our RICO Vicar gang strategy. It's a very effective legal tool that puts into effect the crime gun intelligence. The Minneapolis case is a great example. So they have 15, 20 shootings all around town. They look totally unconnected. Through the crime gun intelligence tools we provide, we're able to connect them together and show that it's the Highs, that's the name of the gang, one group that's responsible for all of this. And so then we put together a RICO case, which has extra teeth, in order to make sure we're taking down the whole organization. So I think that would be my third.
Thank you for your service, and I yield back.
I think it's interesting that the director didn't mention body cameras, even though he told us that they weren't wearing those because of budget cuts, but that didn't make his Christmas list. The time is now the gentleman's from North
I did ask for extra missions, though.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the Malinowski killing, did you say you're deferring to and waiting for this investigation from the Arkansas State Police?
The Arkansas State Police has referred the matter to the district attorney's office. It's my understanding from
And
public
you've
statement.
been deferring until that to take any action yourself. Is that right?
That would be our normal course of action if there's a pending criminal investigation. In order to make sure that we preserve the integrity of that investigation, we let it proceed. Yes.
So that's a criminal investigation only.
They'll decide the scope. My understanding is they're investigating to see.
That's a criminal Let's stay on my question. That's a criminal investigation.
It's an investigation to see whether Arkansas law was violated, is my
That's called a
understanding.
criminal investigation, right? They're a criminal law enforcement agency. Don't filibuster me. Straightforward.
I'm not filibustering. You know that state prosecutors have
All right,
a variety of
That's
different.
my time. The Arkansas State Police, in their press release on April 24, 22, said, "We do not have the authority to address methods and tactics used or whether agency protocols and policies were followed." Have you seen that?
I've seen the press release
You've
that they
seen
have.
that?
Correct.
So you're deferring action on questions of methods and tactics until you see what Arkansas does with the criminal investigation?
That is the normal standard thing that we do, because if you start interviewing witnesses, if you start talking to people in the middle of a criminal investigation, very quickly people start talking about the fact that the integrity of that investigation.
Mr. Dettelbach,
it's very important to respect the
I get
ongoing
it.
investigation.
Mr. Dettelbach, in the Breonna Kemp, did you watch yesterday's hearing by any chance?
I did not have a chance to watch
Okay.
all of yesterday's hearing. I watched
Did you watch some of it?
I watched some of it.
Well, in the Louisville situation with Breonna Taylor, the Metropolitan Police Department there fired its first officer within 90 days of the incident. They were doing that as a matter of their management responsibility. By the way, the Justice Department, of which your agency is a component, has conducted a pattern and practice investigation and is pursuing enforcement action against the Louisville Police Department. What is your excuse for not taking managerial action about the appropriateness of the tactics used in the Malinowski killing?
I think you would agree with me that police officers and agents are entitled to due process just like everybody else.
There's no doubt about that. That doesn't answer my question.
Well,
don't you have management responsibility with respect to the way the agency is conducting such matters?
When we can, based upon the review, and I don't expect it to be a lengthy period of time, we would conduct use of force review as we do in every matter like this that occurs, and we will do that in this case as we do in every matter.
Well, what's soon enough? They acted in Louisville within 3 months. What's soon enough?
Respectfully, we'll see that the investigation will end, and then we will commence our internal review, as we always do.
Concerning body cams, you testified that the rollout within ATF was incomplete. Is it your testimony that the rollout has not extended to ATF personnel in Arkansas, and that's the reason they didn't have body cams?
The field division that covers Arkansas has not yet been implemented. That's correct.
Okay. And you said, what did you say the cost was of your item there? Something in the tens of millions. Was it 40 million, 45 million?
This isn't the downstream cost, because there's huge data costs, as you know, with this. But the initial implementation cost, the request in the budget is $37.5 million.
37 million. So I understand your budget is about 1.7. Well, your budget's about 1.7 billion. So if my calculator is right, that's about 2.6% of your budget. You couldn't find 2.6% of your budget to catch up with common practice among also resource-constrained city police departments all over the country?
Respectfully, our budget is not 1.7, it's 1.625.
Whatever.
And the reason I know that is because that $45 million cut has resulted in not being able to hire agents.
Yeah, but you're talking about something else. I'm talking about body cams that are in common use among metropolitan police departments across this country. And you're saying something that involves 2 or 3% of your budget prevented you from getting it done?
I'm saying that we're in the process, as we said from the beginning, of implementing the policy in phases.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Director.
We continue.
Mr. Director, let me ask you this question. I understand there could be justifications for lots of things about putting tape on, jamming signals, things like that in a certain set of circumstances. What can possibly justify deferring, as that video showed, deferring the execution of that search warrant until the person who justifies the use of such tactics, if there's a question of a risk of violence, was present in the home?
These are career law enforcement agents and
didn't
police.
ask that.
And they make determinations.
I asked you what could possibly justify that.
In my experience, when an agent decides, when a cop decides to go through a door, when a cop decides to execute an operation, they are entitled, if they're correct, the warrant allowed that warrant to be executed on the day it was executed. We'll see what the investigation says, but Congressman, armchair quarterbacking police officers who are risking their lives without evidence yet is not the way to go here.
That's about 5,000 words and not one justification uttered, not one possible justification. My time has expired.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director. Good to see you again. I just want to run through a few things. Some which strike me as surprising. Some are just hypocritical. And I'll ask you some questions at the end, but I did want to deal with a couple of these at the top. The comparison to the Breonna Taylor case struck me as quite surprising. Breonna Taylor was a scenario where no shots were fired at the officers. I think one of the officers actually made a false statement. Well, Breonna Taylor certainly didn't fire any shots at any of the officers. There was the officer who was fired, lied in the affidavit. I think that was found pretty quickly. But in any event, the no-knock issue, I think, is a pretty significant one. And I believe that what's going to happen later today is that there will be a bill offered, the George Floyd Criminal Justice Act, that will help to address one of these issues. So I hear a lot of concern from my Republican colleagues about the no-knock warrant being executed here. I would note that it's pretty routine the way this warrant was executed, but hopefully you all will be willing to support that provision when it's offered today. Mr. Director, did you want to comment on that?
I just wanted to say that, I just wanted to repeat again that because this is an ongoing investigation, I'm not commenting. There are numerous different things that I believe that are out there that may not be shown to be the facts when the investigation happens. So I would just hope that we could all agree to wait till the facts come out and assess those facts, because I hear things that may well not even be correct as a factual matter as things that members are talking about. So that's one of my hopes here today, is just to try and get the facts out.
Well, that's a fair point, but I'll say this. I know that an officer was shot in the execution. I don't have time, I'm sorry. In the execution of the Malinowski warrant. How is that officer doing?
Thank you for asking. My understanding is that he's recovering, and I can take a lot, and I understand that, but one thing I want to say is at one point during, people are heated, somebody said something about somebody got shot in the toe. When a police officer or an agent is shot at, it's a serious matter. When a police officer or an agent is actually shot, it's a serious matter. And I know that nobody here would try to minimize an officer being shot as not being a serious matter. I just want to make sure, I understand people are heated, and maybe I got a little heated just now, but that's one thing that I just want to make sure that I know we all agree on that.
I appreciate that. And also the funding issue, which Mr. Neguse addressed, with respect to paying for body cameras. I know it was a very expensive thing when we did it in Prince George's County, and it was one of the barriers to getting it done as quickly as we wanted. But I hope that's another one of those where my Republican colleagues, since you've expressed such strong desire and concern about body cameras not being present here, I hope you'll be willing to step up now and provide the additional funding in the ATF budget so they can move forward with that expeditiously. I also wanted to say this too. We had another debate a few minutes ago about whether firearms are the leading cause of death for children, and the issue, I guess, was do you count infants or 18 or 19-year-olds or whatever. I just want to reiterate, because that's not the first time we've done that one, and my view then and now is that I think it's a ridiculous point to focus on from the standpoint of whether it's first or second is a leading cause of death. Isn't that enough? I mean, why should we be okay with it? Just, let's say it's the second leading cause of death if you include infants or something. Why would that be okay? Why wouldn't we be concerned and want to try and find ways to bring those numbers down? So, I appreciate the work that you're doing on that front and support the effort. But, we have to find ways to protect our kids from these kinds of gun violence incidents. And with respect to the search warrant, affidavit. I wanted to offer that in the record. I ask unanimous consent that that be offered.
No objection.
And also the search warrant return. I want to make sure that's in the record too. So it's clear what was, in addition to an officer being shot, which did not happen in the Breonna Taylor case, you know, the weapons that were recovered, but also the other types of conduct that supported the probable cause finding by the judge in that case and supported the entry. And then the last point I wanted to make too, you know, the execution of a search warrant while the people are in the house in the morning, my experience was that was kind of standard operating procedure. It's actually unusual to do it any other way. And the reason for that is it's safer for the officers to try and catch them by surprise, and also leads to better opportunities to seize weapons. So in this case, there were many, many, many. And because they thought there were 150 weapons in the house, certainly security and protection for the officers would be a prime consideration. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you. Director Dettelbach, I wanted to follow up on something that Representative Massey was asking you about January 6th pipe bomb investigations. It's over 3 years since it happened. What are you still investigating?
We are not the lead investigative agency. It's the FBI. My understanding is from public really reported there's been over 1,000 interviews conducted. They're investigating the incident.
But it seems like it's like you have a roadmap and FBI not to answer questions. Everyone came here and every question we ask, everything under investigation. It's very clever. You guys brilliant not to answer Congress because everything under investigation, and then when investigation ends, statute of limitation and over, no one gets punished and you continue with this. And this has happened all the time. It seems like your agency should do better than that, investigate something over 3 years. It seems like you should get to some conclusion. But my question is related to these changes under your rule and definition, you know, what is engage in business rule. You know, do you think criminals that want to do something criminal are going to read your 500 pages of definitions? Are they going to read your 500 pages of definition explanations?
I think that, I don't know who will read it, but
or do you think criminals will be doing that?
I think that it will also encourage, as I said at the beginning, hopefully increase compliance with the law among people who
so you understand that criminals are not going to be reading this, okay? But what is it going to do to law-abiding citizens like Brian Malinowski that potentially was just doing, you know, selling these guns, and I don't know the whole circumstances, but he's dead because he was not probably realizing what you were doing in changes of this rule. So my question is for you is going to be, do you understand how dangerous your definitions have become?
Respectfully, our definitions are based upon the law that Congress passed, and it is based upon our observation and experience in the field.
Your interpretation. So let's just go to your definitions. As a normal American, so I understand your definition.
Implementation. It's implementing Congress's law.
Okay, how are you going to implement? I want to understand. I am a gun owner. And I'm going to decide occasionally, say, guys, occasionally I can do maybe 100 times, maybe 5 times. You know what? I am not engaged predominantly a profit. You know, that I don't even have time to do a profit. So at which point, as a regular American citizen, so I understand that you are not going to show up, cut off my electricity, show up to my house, and try to storm the house with a bunch of people that you don't even realize what's going on. So I can be in a situation like a lot of other Americans that not even realize that now you're redefining who the dealer is. So I want to get understanding. Summarize me understanding how I can explain to my constituent what it means now and how I am predominantly earn a profit in this. What is really definition of that?
The statute that Congress passed says that if you're engaged in the business of dealing firearms, quote, predominantly for profit, right, that requires a license. There are some exceptions then that Congress has passed, and respectfully, people may not read the statutes either. They should, though, if they're selling firearms. These aren't possessors. These are people who are reselling firearms repetitively for profit. And I don't think it's too much to ask
for somebody who is selling firearms repetitively for profit
So what is
to read the
repetitively
law.
means? What is occasional repetitively? If I decide, I have lots of guns, and I decided to, I want to replace with something else. I have 50 guns I'm going to sell this year. You just decide that I'm for profit. I don't know, maybe they will be for profit. Definitely no one, was going to sell it at a loss, right? And with your rules, probably prices are keep increasing. So I'm going to become a dealer now? I have to be registered in that?
Again, I've tried to explain, and I'll
No, I'm
continue
trying to explain. So what do you do? What is really going to be now your new definition? Because it's so broad.
It's not a new definition. It implements Congress's definition. Congress changed the definition.
And you put 500
Congress-
pages of explanation. So can
No,
you summarize
it's
that
a-
normally plain language an American can understand?
I believe that our positions they're not secret. They're in
Yeah,
court.
but explain
They're filed.
without reading 500
The
pages
rule-
that are confusing.
The rule seeks by providing practical, conduct-based things that normal people could.
Yeah,
for
so
instance,
please
for
explain.
instance, one of the things that can result in people, depending on all the circumstances, is you take credit cards for payment. That could be one of the signs that somebody's in business. One of the things that might be
if
on
I
the
use
other
a little
side.
app and then I sell a gun and take a credit card, and potentially will be a dealer?
One of the things that might be on the other side is if you're occasionally dealing or gifting to family members, right? We try to say things on both
My time
sides.
has expired, but I'll tell you, you put American lives in danger and your ATF agent in danger by doing this, because you're doing gun control. It is a very clever way to make everyone in dealer have a zero tolerance and exercise gun control and Second Amendment rights, but you put your people in danger and American people. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on the discussions that we've had on the leading causes of death for children that have been spoken about by our colleague from Pennsylvania and also Mr. Ivey, I'd like to ask a unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from April 2022 entitled "Firearms were the leading cause of death in children in 2020." Researchers say also a second one will be unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from October titled "Firearms Now #1 Cause of Death for U.S. Children While Drug Poisoning Enters Top 5."
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentlelady from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, for being here. I know it's been a long day. Thank you for your time. So as I sit here, I'm really struck by what I feel we should be talking about here is that we have a fairly simple mandate from the American people, which is to do all we can to stop gun violence. As my colleagues have said, we have this horrible situation in this country, parents, teachers having to see children being killed every day by gun violence. The country is awash in illegal firearms. We've heard that. We have accidental shootings by and of children. We have increasing suicide rates. And of course, mass shootings continue across our nation. And public poll after public poll tells us the same thing. People want us in Congress to do something, to take action. More than half of Americans consistently support stricter gun laws. Listening to some of my colleagues, you'd think that we were on a different planet. The majority is not even approaching or discussing new public protections or stricter gun laws. And the ATF doesn't have the resources to inspect firearms dealers as directed by Congress. Right now, over 2,000 firearms dealers have not undergone any inspection in over 10 years. There are laws already on the books to help us stem the tide of this violence, but they aren't being enforced because oftentimes Republicans won't give them the money to do so. Now, Director, I appreciate very much that you're here today. I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically about the work that ATF does. You got a big job. How does your agency carry out its mission with just over 5,000 employees?
It's very difficult.
It's shockingly low, given
but the
your
way
charge.
Look, the way we do it is we have an incredible workforce. I mean, the people the career people, I'm the only political appointee at ATF. Not a single Schedule C person, just me. The people who are the career people get the credit here,
These are agents, these are investigators, lab technicians, analysts, staff. They do incredible, dangerous work every day. And the only way to make any progress on this is partnership with our state and local partners, which we're better than anybody else with respect to others at. And number two, being smart about how we use the intelligence that we provide to identify the worst of the worst, to make sure that we are actually taking steps to do two things. Number one, identify the worst of the worst, the trigger pullers and the shooters, and get them out of the community, put them where they belong, incarcerated, bluntly, and also, at the same time, to do something to enforce the existing laws to cut off the supply of guns to those same people. It is far too easy for killers, felons, gang members, rapists, domestic violence people to get firearms, even though the law and everybody agrees they shouldn't have them. So you have to do both of those two things. It's a two-part strategy. And there are people who only want me to do one, and there are other people who only want me to do the other one. And the fact of the matter is, you're not going to make progress unless you have a reasonable approach on both.
So to follow up on that, how do you go about making those decisions about priorities? And are there functions that you unfortunately have to deprioritize due to the resource constraints that you have? And what are those?
So you make the decisions based on data, as best the data that you can find in real time. It's not always perfect. And there are areas of this country where I wish that we would have more agents. The New York City is an example. So in New York City Police Department is 36,000 strong. I have about 30 people in New York City. It is absolutely, and we punch way above our weight, and that's the case everywhere. So we are making decisions about where the crime threat is. When I make an investment on the southwest border, as we have, not I, we have, at ATF, that means at ATF that we can't start up a whole new division. That means we're pulling agents from some other place that we really care about. So we are constantly struggling to balance resources in the best way we can to face a lot of threats.
And Director, you know, I'm just about out of time, but I think it's clear that without substantial funding, we are not going to improve our statistics on gun violence, and we're not going to improve our public safety outcomes. We should be putting the money to work to help protect our kids. I say that as a member of Congress. I also say that as a former teacher and I'm a parent of 2 teenagers. We have to do something about this and not just talk about it. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
We're conflating 2 issues here. A man is dead and an officer was shot, not because of rank and file law enforcement doing their job, but because somebody made a leadership decision in order to execute a warrant in the most dangerous way possible, given the circumstances of that case. And we could sell 6 a.m. and standard operating procedure. You can do that everywhere else. I've represented 3 officers and officers-involved shootings. I spent 10 years dealing with search warrants. I know the facts of this case. I know where the guy worked. I know that he was surveilled. And I know that they chose to implement a warrant in a way that absolutely maximized the risk of harm, both to the person being served the warrant on and to the officers serving the warrant. But I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on to something else quick. Federal gun charges are what we call strict liability crimes, right? If you have a gun and you're a prohibited person, that's the crime. There doesn't need to be intent. There doesn't need to be any of those things, right?
I disagree.
So if you're a felon in possession of a firearm, you can say, I didn't know I was a felon?
No, but there's an intent requirement in Congress's statute. You can read 922G1. It's in the statute, Congressman.
You said earlier that ATF's responsibility is to implement the laws that Congress passes, right?
Correct.
When did the U.S. House pass a rule classifying a pistol brace as a short-barreled rifle?
That rulemaking is based upon the
When
National
did
Firearms
Congress pass a law? When did
1934.
Congress pass a law? They didn't.
In 1934, Congress passed the National Firearms Act, which said that short-barreled rifles were unusually dangerous.
I'm not
Congress's
asking you
words.
about I'm not asking you about short-barreled rifles. I know what short-barreled rifles are qualified as in the National Firearms Act. When did Congress pass a law saying pistol brace is qualified? When did Congress pass that?
Congress passed, they are covered by the
When did the
National.
Senate pass the law? They didn't. When did the president sign the law? He didn't. The first pistol brace was sold in 2012. A guy walked into a gun store, bought it legally, walked out of the gun store with the pistol brace rifle. No need for $200, no need for a stamp.
So you're saying if there's a new brand of gun that didn't exist in 1968, that the Gun Control Act doesn't apply to it?
I'm saying in 2012, a guy in Dickinson, North Dakota walked into a firearms store and bought a gun legally, correct? With a pistol brace. Didn't need to do a stamp, didn't need to do a $200 registration.
We look at, I think...
No, this is a factual question. The first pistol brace was sold in 2012. Did the person who purchased it need a stamp, and did he need the federal government's permission to buy that gun? 2012, that's not a hard question.
Respectfully, the 2012, the thing that has been talked about in this committee previously, was never brought to market.
Okay, so 2015.
It would depend upon the actual design of the individual item. There were numerous different items being manufactured.
You spent
it changed
20
over
years
time.
as a prosecutor, 20 years as a prosecutor. You know the answers to these questions. I'm done asking them. I'm just going to go with numbers. From 2012 until 2023, the ATF estimates that there are 3 to 7 million pistol braces sold on the civilian market, not requiring the $200 stamp from the NFA for a short-barreled rifle. Now, what Congressional Research Service says there are 10 to 40 million of those things purchased in the same period of time. Manufacturer sales estimate are significantly higher than the ATF's estimate to include, and those estimates exclude 2020, 2021, and 2022. Now, the deputy chief of the ATF has stated that prior to June 1, 2023, 255,162 registrations on retroactive purchases were received by the ATF. Does that sound accurate?
I don't know who that person, they're going to have a title like that, but the number sounds like the number of people that during a certain period of time sought registration. The number does sound familiar, but I don't know the quote that you're talking.
So if I got a rancher in southwest North Dakota who's hunting snow geese to a federal wildlife refuge, and a U.S. agent comes out, he purchased that rifle legally in 2015, and he's out shooting geese with a shotgun. U.S. Fish and Wildlife comes to his car and sees a gun in there with a pistol brace. What's the penalty for him now? He bought the gun legally, 2015.
Well, again,
it's 5 to 10 years and a max of a $250,000 fine. You talk about costs, you talk about budget cuts. So let's just assume the low-end number of the ATF numbers on 3 to 7 million. 3 million guns that were purchased legally without any extra requirement. The ATF has gotten 255,000 of those registered. So you are roughly saying 2.7 million people are now felons in possession of firearms for something they purchased legally.
I respectfully disagree with a lot of the characterizations in your question. The last administration, Attorney General Barr, issued guidance on this before ATF even got to this. People were on notice for years and years and years that you can't take something and break it into two and then put it together and treat it differently than the person who buys it in one piece.
They bought a gun legally and you guys retroactively made it illegal in a different qualification.
Respectfully,
exactly
I disagree. That is not what the facts reflect.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to start by offering my condolences to Ms. Malinowski, who I believe was here earlier. St. Louis and I are here today seeking accountability for the gun violence epidemic in our country and for all instances of potential law enforcement misconduct. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here today. Let me say that I support several of the ATF's recent efforts, including the Ghost Guns rule, the stabilizing brace rule, and the efforts to stop gun trafficking. But as gun violence continues to shatter families and communities, thanks in part to weak gun laws in Republican-controlled states like mine in Missouri, equitable and effective enforcement of our existing laws, it must be a top priority. There is a difference between the way the law is written and the way it is enforced, as communities like St. Louis know all too well. So taking on the gun violence epidemic requires asking hard questions about enforcement. That's why the last time you were before this committee, I asked you about the Good Old Boys Roundup. In the 1980s and 1990s, ATF agents organized shameful whites-only events, which former ATF Director John McGaugh characterized as being racist in nature, anti-Black, and having discrimination almost every year. It may seem like old history, but there are legitimate and recent concerns about racial bias in the agency's enforcement operations, specifically in its use of sting operations. For example, a USA Today investigation from 2014 found that 91% of people arrested in ATF sting operations were Black or Latino. When you were U.S. Attorney, your office prosecuted these kinds of cases. Are you aware of these concerns regarding sting operations? And if any, what steps have you taken to address?
At ATF, we are very clear that we don't look at any of those kinds of factors, and it is absolutely necessity, Congresswoman, that law enforcement not look at these kind of factors. And I would say there were comments that were made earlier that I thought somebody was perhaps implying that because somebody's wealthy or lives in a nice neighborhood, that they should be treated differently than other people. And I know there are lots of people who are in communities where they economically struggle, who are law-abiding citizens. We don't assume that because of where you live or how much you make, that you're any more or less likely to be a law-abiding citizen. That is a core value at ATF, and it's very important for you to ask that question and very important for me to answer it.
Thank you. And I will say that sometimes looking at it, we get to what you just said, though, looking at it and seeing that we do understand that folks in marginalized communities are often over-criminalized or criminalized, period, is an issue that we must also address and fight to. I think you kind of started to allude to that. And so thank you. These questions are essential because in order for the ATF to be effective today, it needs to fix the problems of yesterday, including its troubled history of racist behavior and enforcement. But my concern about enforcement does not extend only to questions of racism. There needs to be accountability for all instances of potential misconduct by ATF agents. And that's why I do support my Republican colleagues' efforts to get more information from federal and local law enforcement about the death of Brian Malinowski. I know there is evidence that Mr. Malinowski fired first on the agents, but the circumstances warrant more information about what happened that day. But I say this because my solidarity, I want to be clear, my solidarity and my pursuit for accountability, my pursuit of accountability are not conditional. But I will say that I have been surprised to hear my Republican colleagues expressing concern about law enforcement shooting, lack of body camera footage, and no-knock warrants. I'm surprised because I and many of my Democratic colleagues have pushed for law enforcement accountability for years, and Republicans have mocked us and fought against us at every step. I'm surprised because 2023 set another record for law enforcement killings in this country. Police have killed an average of 3 people per day. Police disproportionately kill Black people, and there have only been 9 days this year where police didn't kill someone. Yet Republicans have refused to hold hearings about any of those deaths. And my question is, where have you been? Where have you been? Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, we've been protesting for 10 years. We have been protesting, we've been shot with rubber bullets, we've had dogs unleashed. We have been hit with tear gas and rubber bullets. George Floyd, we were out there for 3 months. Mike Brown, we were out there for 400 days. Where were you? Why didn't you care then? Because they're Black? I don't understand. All of a sudden, now we want to talk. But see, the thing is this. When we took a knee, folks were mad and criticized us. When we were nonviolent, people still criticized us. But now all of a sudden, it's because now the difference is it color? But I say this, my solidarity is not conditional. So I ask them for the record that their solidarity is not conditional, that they are willing to support oversight and accountability for all deaths by law enforcement officers, regardless of race, ethnicity, faith, location, or anything else, that they will vote for real policy solutions that prevent police brutality and fund programs that keep our communities safe, including gun violence. And yes, I went over because someone else went over too. I just want to hear that come from my Republican colleagues.
The time of the gentlelady.
We care about police brutality that affects every person.
I thank you. The time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, as you may know, I'm the co-lead alongside with Congressman Stanton of Arizona on the bill that's exempting certain less than lethal projectile devices from the Gun Control Act definition of a firearm. Tasers. ATF provided some comments on an earlier draft of the bill, noting some concerns with the legislation. I'm sure you're aware of the bill. does ATF still have the same concerns that we had on the earlier version?
I don't know. Look, Congressman, can I get back to you on that? I don't want to answer precipitously. I know this is an important issue for a lot of people, including some in law enforcement have expressed views on it. So can we get back to you on that? Because I don't know whether any changes in the bill have affected anything.
Okay, so then let me just, bear with me then. I'll explain some of the arguments. Hopefully, as the director, your understanding of the Gun Control Act will be strong enough to provide some context. But the proposed definition of less than lethal device would be unworkable in the field, I think, is the issue.
Yeah.
Because officers and agents cannot measure the projectile velocity, during field stops and searches and seizures.
As opposed to centrally, but you're talking about out in the field, I understand. Yes.
So, I mean, the ATF doesn't currently test any of the firearm velocity in the field on any of the search and seizure stuff. Is that right or not?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct. It's always hard because some of our operations aren't in Washington. We have operations that are not field operations but are centralized in other places. So I want to be careful. But we have, I think you're right as a general matter, yes. I'll check though and get back to you. If that's not correct, I'll get back to you.
Okay. So to be clear, ATF right now, though, the concerns that this change would be unworkable in the field hinges on the idea that officers and agents would suddenly need to start measuring velocity and checking the internal workings, right? I mean, what I'm trying to get to the bottom, because I think Congress is way beyond ATF on this. I think there's a bipartisan group that certainly is starting to grow when it comes to this technology, and ATF still seems stuck in where we were 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Okay, I understand.
We
will get.
I mean, obviously, you're getting the same feedback that we are, because this is happening. Law enforcement wants more.
There are exceptions in the current law for law enforcement, but I understand your concern, and we will get back to you, Congressman. I will commit to you that we will get back to you.
Okay, very good, very good. So with the time that I have left, I just also wanted to submit for the record a letter from Mr. Earl Griffith, who served in the ATF for more than 20 years, retiring as a division chief of ATF's Firearm and Ammunition Technology Division. Mr. Griffith's letter, dated March 6, 2024, is in support of the bill, H.R. 3269, and suggests that ATF already has the existing authority to revisit classification determinations if the manufacturer decides to modify a less lethal projectile device into a lethal configuration. And that's what the manufacturers are doing. I mean, they're changing the technology to kind of match up with where ATF is at, and I think that's unnecessary. I think this thing could be cleaned up if we would just have somebody pay attention to kind of where Congress is moving on this and how quickly we're moving.
Congressman, my understanding is that the statutory language that is at issue in a lot of these is to expel a projectile by means of an explosion. And that is what is causing some of these classifications. Now, Mr. Griffith obviously is a well-respected, longtime ATF employee. We'll look at the letter and try to get back to your office on where things stand.
Yeah, I'm just telling you, Congress is way ahead of where ATF is on this. And that's why I wish you would take a deeper, kind of longer look at kind of where we're at. Because otherwise, the input that you would have is simply not going to be taken seriously if the statute is written or if the changes are already made. So I would encourage you to do that. I yield back.
Gentleman yield? 30 seconds for the gentleman yield? Yeah, thank you. I just, real quick, you mentioned earlier that we need to be focused on the facts, particularly relative to the Malinowski case. I just want to make clear, understand, are you disputing that the ATF was not in Little Rock, Arkansas, ready to execute a raid on the week before, on March 12th, 2024?
I'm neither disputing
we saw the video. We saw the video, right?
There's a lot of again, this is a slippery slope. I have to abide by our Department of Justice policy.
You're saying ATF wasn't in Little Rock
No,
the week before?
I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying that until the investigation is completed, I am not disputing that fact or any other fact. I'm trying to counsel because I hear
All I'm
a
saying is
lot
you-
of
you
things
said earlier
flying out
things were-
there.
You said earlier things were stated that were not facts. I think
wasn't
I have stuck to
focusing-
the facts.
I wasn't focusing
but I want to
on
just double
that.
check.
There's been a lot of things said, Congressman,
Gentleman from
Mr.
Virginia,
Chairman, I'm sorry.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
The death of Brian Malinowski is a tragedy, but unfortunately, it is not a surprise given the cavalier attitude of the ATF over the years and the way that they play fast and loose with the law and with the facts and with the lives of American citizens. I want to ask you about the latest area in which the ATF is playing fast and loose and really taking actions that are going to endanger more lives in the future if we don't see changes, and that's the new attempt to have a universal registration check rule. As you know, the Gun Control Act makes it unlawful for any person, save a licensed dealer, to engage in the business of dealing in firearms until he's filed an application with ATF and received a license. The 86 Act modified the GCA, adding a statutory definition of engaging in the business, and then in 2022, Biden signed into law the BCA, which broadened the definition by eliminating principal objective and replacing it with a requirement to predominantly earn a profit. But I want to ask you, because people who make occasional sales, exchanges, or purchases of firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection or for a hobby, or who sells all or part of his personal collection of firearms, was that portion of FOPA altered by the 22 Act?
So
was the exclusion altered?
That language
by the
is
22
in
Act?
that language, I believe. I mean, this is in litigation, our position, and the rule speaks for itself. But I believe you will find in black and white in the rule that language that you just said. That in black and white in the rule, that language is there.
Yes, that language remains, that exclusion remains unaltered by the BSCA. So these people who make occasional sales, exchanges, or personal purchases of firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection or for a hobby, or who sell all or part of their personal collection of firearms, are exempt from this 22 Act modification, and yet what we see...
For those activities.
Right, for those activities. All right, well, let's
They're
talk
doing
about
a
whether
whole bunch of
personal
other
collection-
things.
Right. Do you believe that a personal collection of firearms can be for self-defense?
So I think, again, the provisions of the rule speak for itself. And in this format, it's hard to get into a deep debate on this. We also have filed significant legal papers in courts that are hearing this. And because it's pending litigation, nothing I say can or should contradict any of those things. The rule sets forth conduct-based factors which, under the totality of circumstances, right, could give rise to somebody being engaged in the business or not. And it gives examples. It gives
I'm
examples.
glad you said conduct, because where did Congress make it a crime to merely intend to earn a profit off of selling a privately owned firearm? Because that's what you're attempting to...
There clearly is an intent element of this statute that Congress wrote.
Solely intent? There's no action?
Again, as in many criminal statutes and many statutes that are regulatory, there is both an act and an intent. Sometimes those things differ from statute and regulation to other statutes and regulations. The text of the law and the text of the rule are always what controls.
Didn't change, and so your efforts to become mind readers over at ATF and somehow determine intent based on no activity whatsoever on the part of a gun owner to earn a profit,
Congressman,
is playing fast and loose with the statute yet again.
Congressman, not even talking about this statute, but in many, many, many regulatory functions and many administrative proceedings, many civil proceedings, people's intent is part of the determination that finders of facts make. They look at their words. They look at various different things that they're doing, and they can infer intent. I think the standard jury instruction in many cases talks about these things.
Well, I just want to know when Congress authorized ATF to require Americans who offer to sell even one firearm to another family member to get a federal license, submit fingerprints, maintain government registration paperwork, register as a business, and keep regular business hours open for ATF inspections.
Congressman,
they never did that.
Let me be clear. This is not, the rule cannot and is not and does not create a universal background check
We could not do that. Only Congress could do that, and I want to be very clear here that the rule does not do that.
I get what you're doing. ATF is playing too cute by half. The American people see it, we see it, and we're not going to allow you to do that. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
A December 2021 ATF memo alerted the American people that the ATF was maintaining a digital, searchable, centralized registry of guns and gun owners in violation of various federal prohibitions and contrary to what you testified to under oath today. In response, Representative Michael Cloud and 52 House members sent the ATF a letter dated November 22nd, 2021. ATF responded to that letter stating that it had 920,664,765 records, 865,787 and 86,000 of which are in a digitalized format, which Gun Owners of America has proved to be searchable. This was discovered shortly after ATF was revealed to have processed over 54 million records in a single year. What is the latest record count for ATF's illegal digital searchable national gun registry?
0. We obey the law.
According
We do
to
not,
your letter,
none of our
according to
records.
your letter, you have over 865 millions of these records are in digitalized format. You have admitted it.
Respectfully, I think ATF is the only customer of Adobe Acrobat that
Well,
pays
let's
money
get
to
into that.
remove search function.
Before the Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee in April of last year, you testified that ATF pays Adobe Acrobat Extra to have certain search functionality eliminated.
That's not correct.
Well, is ATF's digital database of gun owner records capable of being opened by normal Adobe Acrobat and searched by name?
Again, we
It's
pay.
a yes or no question. Is it?
We pay to have search function eliminated. We don't pay Adobe Acrobat, I believe. We pay somebody else. But
If ATF asked, could Adobe Acrobat re-enable name search functionality on ATF's illegal gun registry?
it is not an illegal registry. We do not
If
search
ATF
by. We do
asked-
not search by. We do not search in the method that you're suggesting, and we cannot. And these are records that we pay a public safety cost, which Congress to
ATF
balance for this
asked-
decision.
If
which is
ATF asked, could Adobe Acrobat re-enable name search functionality on ATF's illegal gun registry?
I'm not an expert in Adobe Acrobat coding. I do know that we do not keep a gun registry. I also
You have
know
records.
that
You have admitted that you have over 920 million records, over 865 million of which are in digitalized format, correct?
the question, if your answer is, are they somehow scanned in so that we literally don't have to have 950 million pieces of paper, that is a lot different from what you're implying with respect to having a gun registry. It is also true, Congressman, that we don't have any records of firearms purchases for people who are still in business, which is the vast majority of currently sold firearms. We have zero.
You also testified before that subcommittee that ATF's digital database of gun and gun owners is not capable of being searched by personal identifier. Can ATF's gun registry be searched by make, model, and serial number, enough searchability to create a list of, say, all AR-15 owners?
The answer to your question is we do not use, search, get around the registry.
You're not answering my question.
Your question had, respectfully, it was a technical question with 5 or 6 different parts. I'm trying not to erroneously, as you said, I'm under oath, I'm trying not to erroneously misstate things of technical nature. We do not keep a registry. We use these things for pending homicide investigations. It takes us a lot longer to find the name of the killer.
Mr. Dettelbach, you have mentioned gun running and gun violence associated with Mexican cartels and the crime associated with that. In fact, you refer to the cartels as, quote, the most dangerous organizations in the world. How many conversations have you had with President Biden or Secretary Mayorkas demanding that they close the southern border?
We do not, ATF does not.
How many discussions have you had with President Biden or Mayorkas about closing the southern border?
The answer to your question is,
Zero.
we work with DHS
How many
on
conversations have you
border-related.
had with them demanding that they close the southern border?
Again.
It's a simple question.
Again, may I answer?
How many conversations have you had
We
demanding?
discuss our border-related security issues with DHS frequently. I have had
Have you
conversations
demanded
with
that they
Secretary
close the
Mayorkas
southern
about our
border?
efforts.
Have you
to try and-
demanded that they close the southern border?
I'm at ATF. It is not our jurisdiction to police the southern border. That's for DHS, Congresswoman.
You don't care about crime in this country if you're not trying to address what's going on at the southern border.
Respectfully, I deeply disagree. I think it's very unfair.
Gentleladies, time has expired. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, here's what I find troubling. In 2021, there were 5 FFL licenses that were revoked, but in 2023, that number has jumped to 157, I believe. That's a dramatic increase, and in my opinion, and I think we've echoed this on this side, a very stark indicator of the Biden administration's aggressive overreach against FFLs. And here's what's worse. An increasing number of firearms dealers faced with severe and often disproportionate consequences for minor clerical errors have elected to shut down their operations rather than endure the extensive and costly process of defending their practices. This is like David versus Goliath, except that Goliath, the U.S. government, wins because all the resources are there and you have a small business trying to defend themselves against the insurmountable resources of a federal government. So let's take a look at the number of voluntary business closures post-inspection over the last couple years. In 2021, there were 24. 2022, 69, and 2023, there were 80. This is a result of ATF's zero tolerance policy and, quite frankly, a very concerning trajectory of ATF. This is all occurring under the guise of public safety, but ATF is essentially working to dismantle a very lawful firearm industry. Let me ask you something, and this was talked about earlier. Where can I find authorization from Congress that you would revoke somebody's FFL for a minor clerical error? Where is that in the statute?
The statute and the policy and our implementation deals with willful violations. And by the way, it limits them further to violations that endanger public safety. The vast majority, one thing I think we agree on, which I want to say because it's important, the vast majority of firearms licensees out there are following the law and following the rules.
Correct.
They're law-abiding businesses. That's why over 98, almost 99% of our inspections do not result in revocation. There's due process. People can request a hearing. In the hearings, Congressman, that we conduct, these are administrative hearings at ATF. Half the time, we decide not to revoke because of something that the FFL presents to us. People have lawyers at some of those, they don't have lawyers at others. And in many cases, we work with FFLs to try and cure any defects, if they're clerical defects, to make the FFL stronger in terms of a target for people who, not the FFL is doing something illegal, but others are taking advantage of purchasers.
Director, here's my concern, and I know we've got limited time, and I'm certainly respectful of yours. The BSCA was passed in 2022. Based on that, you have, there's been a slight modification to the rule that, quote, even a single transaction or offer to engage in a transaction when combined with other evidence may be sufficient to require a license as an FFL. And so you were inferring from that, and again, I think this is where the minor clerical errors come in. Congress has made no law to this. There is a 2022 amendment, but I think you have largely ignored another statute, 18 U.S.C. 921A21. Are you familiar with that statute?
Yeah, I'm familiar with all the code, but
What does that say,
respond.
Director, what does that say? What does that statute say?
I believe it's a provision you're talking about for importers. Which is the provision that you're referring to?
It says that the term engaged in business
so the
shall
engaged
not include a person that makes occasional sales, exchanges, or purchases of firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection or a hobby, or who sells all or part of their personal collection or firearms.
That's quoted in the rule.
Correct. The concern that I have, though, is that that's not the application by ATF, that you're taking a very heavy-handed approach. And again, you have to look at the disproportionality of this, is that you have the heavy hand of government, you have the enforcement, you're creating these rules, I think, which are beyond the scope of what Congress has implied or directed, and you are using this to kind of target people. And again, I'm not talking about the bad actors. I'm talking about lawful businesses who are trying to do the right thing and have minor clerical errors. Let me ask you something real quick. I want to shift gears. Could you describe Spartan? What is Spartan?
Spartan is the name of the general case management system that exists at ATF. It replaced an older system. The system had been in service for many, many years. It was no longer supported, I think, anymore by the technology out there, so we replaced it with the new case management system.
So ATF administrative investigators are tasked with determining whether an FFL willfully did anything, and according to a recent ATF revocation hearing, whether, quote, in preparing the report of violations is the issue of willfulness even a factor, end quote, the ATF director responded, I input data and Spartan does the figuring. So are we allowing AI to determine whether or not something is willful?
I'm so glad you're at. Absolutely not.
So these are humans that make
people,
these
human beings review all of these things at supervisory levels. You cannot revoke somebody without several levels of approval.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're almost done, sir. Thank you for being here for a second time. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Basic question, sir. You're an attorney, correct? That's my understanding.
Yes, I am, sir.
So I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, knowing that you understand the Constitution, including our Bill of Rights, correct?
I hope so, sir.
So what is your interpretation of our Second Amendment? Do you think that Americans have the right to bear arms? Yes or no? Just give me your brief overall view of it.
Yes, and I think what we do is we look to what the Supreme Court has decided on this. The Supreme Court, Congressman, has been very clear on this. The law is, the Second Amendment jurisprudence is lengthy and changing, but as a lawyer, I don't get to decide that. The courts decide it, and the courts have said yes, is the answer to your question.
Okay, so we have these Second Amendment rights because we know how important it is for us to maintain our constitutional republic and a functioning republic because, again, as a gun owner myself, as a lawful gun owner myself, it's very important to me to be able to protect my home but also prevent tyrannical governments from infringing on our rights as human beings bestowed to us in our Constitution. So it's my humble opinion, sir, that the ATF is certainly infringing on a lot of these rules for law-abiding citizens and infringing on our Second Amendment rights for law-abiding citizens. I'm not talking about trying to catch the bad guys that have guns. I am talking about implementing a level of pain on people like me that, quite frankly, was not bestowed to us via the Second Amendment. Unfortunately, as bureaucrats are attempting to infringe on the Second Amendment rights, that some lawmakers of Congress, they see gun owner tragedies as an opportunity to slowly chip away at these rights. So recently, lawmakers used a heartbreaking Uvalde tragedy as an opportunity to pass red flag legislation. This is a fact. I remember a time when we were told that red flag laws were simply a conspiracy theory. I'm old enough to remember that. And they are not a conspiracy theory anymore, sir. Red flag laws are in bills and they are in Biden's executive orders. If you don't know what red flags are, in short, red flag laws are a type of pre-crime enforcement where courts grant orders allowing for the seizure of firearms from someone who hasn't committed an actual crime. When I think of red flag laws, I see the Safer Communities Act, which President Biden signed into law in 2022. The Safer Communities Act included $750 million in funding for states to implement and improve red flag laws. Again, that's going after the good guys, not the bad guys. But it had to stop there. It has not stopped there, sir. Biden in 2023 announced an executive order on gun control with the goal of, quote, increasing the effective use of red flag laws. Biden also opened the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, led by Kamala Harris, which has further encouraged and entrenched red flag laws across the nation. These are all facts. I'm still waiting for her to tell us what the root causes are of the border crisis, and you're going to try to tell me that Kamala Harris is going to tell us the root causes of gun violence. Good luck with that. Finally, the ATF has expanded upon the Safer Communities Act by issuing a new ruling that in practice will implement universal background checks. I'm going to say quiet part out loud because we're almost done. Whenever a gun tragedy occurs in this country, we always hear the left say, we have to do something. We have to do more. And then once legislation is passed, my colleagues on the left then say, we have to always do more and more and more and more. I'm going to warn the American people that we have to do more. What we have to do more really, really means. First, to come after AR-15s. Then they come after your sporting rifles. Then they come after your long guns. And then when homicides have not decreased because you take away all of those weapons, and keep in mind the AR-15 is responsible for 6% of homicides in this country, they're going to come after your handguns and disarm our country and disarm our rights and take away our Second Amendment rights that have been given to us by our founding fathers. And rather than take away guns from law-abiding citizens, instead, we should be going after criminals, specifically criminals. The reason why I'm talking about red flag laws is because the American public understands that we're going to start having mission creep here. You go after one thing, you go after another thing, and then there's always more. There's always going to be a fight. And we're using tragedies to infringe on rights that have been given to us by our Second Amendment. And as you, being the head of the ATF, I need you to be cognizant and very aware of that. Because most of the people in Texas that are ranch owners, AR-15 owners like myself, combat veterans like myself, we don't need more laws. We need to implement the laws that we have on the books and go after the bad guys that have guns, not the good guys, and that's your job. Thank you so much for being here, sir. And I yield back the rest of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Director, thank you for being here. I apologize. We got to run to votes, and so we're going to sprint out of here. We appreciate you being here for 3.5 hours.
Thank you.
And answering our question. That concludes today's hearing. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness, or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.